Chapter 51, The Next Realm. Garen, what are you doing here? Kai was nearly speechless by the sudden appearance of his oldest brother. He blinked his eyes deliberately. Yep, his brother was still there, decked out in light-looking metal armor. Let's go, Garen said without adding any further details. The other students were all looking at Garen with expressions of admiration. Kai recalled his brother was the winner of the very tournament in which he was participating. Fine. Together they exited the arena with Kai following Garen's quick pace. They walked in silence, not even bothering to look at each other. It was awkward. Growing up, Garen was the one person in the family that Kai hadn't gotten along with. For whatever the reasons, there seemed to be a wall between them throughout Kai's entire second life. Now his brother had mysteriously shown up after a year and was taking him somewhere. Drink this. Garen held a glowing blue vial of liquid to Kai as they walked onto the main road. Taking the vial, he asked, "What is it?" "Liquid mana. It will refill the mana you've used." Liquid mana potion, standard. Kai's eyes shined with wonder. He had never heard of such a potion. Still, he didn't drink it. "Tell me why I need to drink this." Garen turned his head to him, giving him a look as if he was stupid. "Why do you have to ask so many questions and make this so difficult? Just drink it." "I'm the difficult one?" Kai mocked. "You show up after an entire year without visiting me once or giving me a warning, and you expect me to listen to your every command." He shook his head. "I'm not drinking whatever you give me without you telling me what is going on." "Listen, you brat. Do you know how expensive that vial is?" "No, and I don't care right now. Tell me what is going on." Garen grabbed at his hair and squeezed his fist as if he was going to pull it out, but seemed to think better of it. "Kai, I'm here to help." Garen tried to sound sincere, but the mashing of his teeth seemed to have the opposite effect. "So you say. Why are you really here?" "I was watching the tournament." Garen looked like he was in a pissed-off mood. His pace increased as Kai followed behind. "You won't win unless you reach the Forging Realm. I'm taking you to get those last few levels." Kai stopped. "You're lying," he said in disbelief. Garen stopped and turned. "No, I'm not." "Why, though? Did father pay you?" Garen scoffed. "No, little brother. This was all my idea. And as to why, just be grateful and accept my help." Kai examined his brother's face, but could discern nothing. Garen had long mastered his stoic face. Even if they didn't get along, Garen had never been intentionally cruel to Kai, just indifferent. "Okay," Kai said. If his brother said he was going to help him, then he would trust his word. He took the vial and drank it. The effects were immediate. There was pressure on his body, but unlike his gravity, which pushed him down to the ground, the pressure was inside of him, wanting to burst out. Normally, it would take about 5 hours for his mana to refill, based on the mana destiny in the area, but with the vial, it had only taken a few minutes. Kai would have to inquire how Garen had found such a miraculous potion. He was quite sure that there had never been one in the alchemy shops he had visited. Never drink more than one in a day, or it will have dangerous effects. The two walked until they were outside of the capital. A few hundred meters from the walls, Garen stopped. "The place I have in mind is 2 hours away by carriage. I'm going to carry you so we can make it there quickly." Before Kai could respond, Garen had already picked him up in a princess carry and began running down the road. The wind blasted into his face as their pace was easily 4 times quicker than Kai could run even without armor. Over the course of 30 minutes, Garen showed no fatigue despite carrying Kai, who was still in his armor. Stopping on an incline, Kai caught himself as Garen dropped him without warning. During the run, his brother kept changing his direction, dodging imaginary obstacles until they had reached halfway up the first mountains. The area was filled with trees and tall grass and brush waist height. Oddly, there were strange chirping sounds all around them, but Kai wasn't able to see any animals or monsters. Despite being a part of a volcanic mountain chain, the area was quite green. Looking up the mountain, the ground gradually increased in steepness until it tapered off at a crest at the top of the first mountain. Behind the crest, another mountain loomed even higher until it too tapered off. "Where are they at?" Kai asked, as his brother was holding a sword entirely made of ash. Mimicking him, Kai brought out his own. There had been no chit-chat on the way here. Kai had no idea what kind of monsters his brother would take him to fight, or at what level they would be. All he knew was that the mountain was a place where even Adept Realm fighters weren't supposed to visit without a group. "There are 3 of them, and they are already hunting us," Garen said in a tone of concentration. His eyes flicked back and forth between 3 locations. Following his eyes, Kai noticed the brush was moving ever so slightly in 3 different spots. Whatever was hunting them was already heading straight for them and was short enough to stay hidden below the brush. "When they come into range, use your large area gravity spell." Kai nodded, but his brother couldn't see. The monsters were only 10 meters away and gaining quickly. As his domain encompassed the area, Garen was already on the move. A grey blur descended on the unseen monsters. He couldn't keep track of brother's blade as he sliced and moved to his next victim. He was like a reaper of death when 3 pings sounded in his head before he even saw the blade stop. "Your group has slain Mountain Lurker, Adept Level 13. Your group has slain Mountain Lurker, Adept Level 2. Your group has slain Mountain Lurker, Adept Level 5. There was no level up, even after assisting in slaying 3 monsters in the 3rd realm of power. Apparently his magic didn't contribute that much. A thought came to Kai. His brother had slain 3 creatures in the Adept realm quickly and efficiently, making him wonder what realm or level he was currently in. His guess was the Profound realm, but all his identifier gave him was question marks. Kai walked up to the creature. Its body was about the same dimensions as a medium-sized dog. Instead of fur, red scales covered its entire body. The most unique thing about the lurker wasn't its yellow beak dyed red in blood. No, it was its tail. A tail that was covered all around with the same red scales, but its length was nearly 1.5 times its body and head. Kai watched its eyes for a moment, checking for signs of life, but its dark red eyes stared vacantly into the sky. His brother looked him over. "Chi, not even a level, let's go." He quickly set off before Kai could even see what the monsters looked like. Without increasing his participation and contribution in fighting these monsters, it would take quite a lot more to level him up. Monsters in the Adept realm were probably only irritated by his gravity. A few minutes later, his brother held a fist up, giving the sigh to stop. Kai froze and peered around. He was having trouble finding the monsters. The wind had begun to pick up, causing all of the brush to move and flow in the breeze. "Shit, Kai, 7 of them are coming. We are surrounded. Use your gravity now." Before Kai could even activate his domain, Garen was like a wraith of vengeance and blood. He darted forward with great speed, his ashen blade already exploding in blood and gore. The familiar feel of domain activated as the brush dipped a little, but not enough to see his targets. Eyes shifting all around, he heard an inhuman screech call out nearby. Twisting his body, he looked for signs of an incoming attack. The wind whipped across his face and hair, delivering an odd smell to him. Spinning, he saw the visage of a monster, all right jumping at him out of the brush. His sword slashed across, combined with heavy blow. It felt like he hit a massive, unyielding boulder as the sword connected. The force of his blow was enough to smash the creature into the ground. Grimacing, he noticed immediately that the wound wasn't very deep. Movement rang all around him. He had to trust his brother to take care of the other creatures, as the monster he had knocked down was already up and coming at him. There was absolutely no way he could hold off 2 of these creatures by himself. There was no time to smile, but he did find some joy when he heard a 3rd ding sound off in his head. Moving fast, his sword stabbed out with another heavy blow, but the creature reacted too fast, easily evading it. As Kai desperately tried to bring his sword to a guarding position, the lurker flashed overhead as it crashed into his chest. It felt like a hammer struck him as he was sent flying backward. Smashing into the ground, he felt a large weight straining his chest armor. Like a king of the mountain, the creature stepped and walked on him until its ugly face and beak were right in front of his. Trying to bring his sword up to stab the lurker, its tail slapped into his hand, knocking his weapon away. Kai felt cold as there was nothing he could do to stop the beast now. Before it could puncture a hole in his head, a ding sounded out, and the lurker's head crashed onto the ground beside him while the body dropped onto his own. His brother was standing in front of him, a sword of ash hovering above the corpse of the mountain lurker, crushing his body. Turning off his domain, the corpse lightened. "Not bad," he heard. "Your group has slain Mountain Lurker, Adept Level 23. Your group has slain Mountain Lurker, Adept Level 1. Vanguard has reached Foundation Level 99. Vanguard has reached Foundation Level 100. Kai took a deep sigh of relief. That was about one of the most nerve-wracking experiences he ever had. Anyone with common sense knew better than to fight a monster an entire realm above yours by yourself, let alone 2 realms. Thankfully, it seemed like everything had worked out. He had been able to give the creature a small wound, which helped him to level up twice. Pushing the corpse off Kai's body with his foot, Garen held his hand out to him. Grabbing it, he hoisted himself up. There had been a few seconds between the second-to-last lurker's death and the one that had been on top of him. Kai had a feeling that Garen had been waiting until the last moment to help. He downed one of the minor health potions he always kept on hand. Sitting on the lurker corpses, Kai and Garen rested while their mana and stamina recovered. His brother stared out into the brush, pointedly ignoring Kai's eyes on him. One more level to go. A warm, humid breeze blew past them. "I want you to solo the next one we come across." "Not like you're going to give me a choice," Kai mumbled. All he received was a grin in response. "You ever going to tell me why you are really doing this?" Kai asked. The overcast sky was still somewhat bright, so they still had plenty of time to talk. Regardless, he didn't let himself become distracted as he tried to make conversation. His eyes and ears were alert and constantly listening and roaming for any sneak attacks. A few minutes passed where he received no answer. "Kai, Garen stood. "We have incoming. They must have smelled the blood." What convenient timing. Right as you decide to answer, Kai thought. Again, the brush was moving in multiple lines that were coming to them. Kai's domain was activated before they came into range. Right now, he wished he had brought his mace, but sadly, it had been left with Nicholas. Garen was already on the move, slashing and striking down unseen targets beneath the brush. Kai's eyes followed one line of moving brush that was almost upon him until it stopped a few feet from him. An unsettling calm settled over the brush in front of him. Just as he was about to move, something wrapped around his leg, throwing him into the air. Kai crashed hard and rolled into the brush, flattening a section of it with his body. Hopping back on his feet, he sidestepped the lurker's long tail as it slammed where he previously landed. His sword arced into the tail as it tried to curl around his leg. An inhuman screech sounded as his sword cut partway into the meaty tail. Lifting his sword to get another swing in, the tail whipped into the side of his body, flinging him away. Only through sheer will did he keep his grip on his sword. Kai swore he heard a laugh as he flew through the air. He was certain without his alderite armor, he would have died by now. Still, his ribs were probably bruised or cracked, judging from the pain flaring up. Scrambling onto his feet, the lurker blood-red eyes focused on him. "Garen, a little help," Kai voiced aloud. He had no idea where his brother was. His eyes were solely on the lurker. Minus the half-hanging tail, the lurker was completely undamaged. There were no obvious weak spots on the beaked-scaled lizard dog. "You got this," his brother called out unhelpfully from out of sight. Deciding he needed to take the initiative in this fight, Kai lunged forward. He performed a series of rapid strikes as he and the lurker felt each other out. The lurker was probably afraid of his sword as it evaded each strike. Meanwhile, Kai made sure not to use his heavy blow, or else he might overextend and lose the fight. 30 seconds felt like several minutes. The lurker was beginning to become bolder the longer they fought, likely finding out Kai wasn't as scary as it might have first thought. Like a scorpion, the tail attacked at the same time as its claws, despite the damage, keeping Kai's focus split on the main body and that merciless appendage. Even when the lurker's claws barely nicked his shin guards, the sound haunted him as he considered what it would do to his body if it connected. The red-scaled tail whipped straight at his head, causing him to lean back. He wanted to yell to Garen for help, but there was no chance as the lurker was pushing him to his physical and mental limits as it didn't give him a moment to breathe. Choosing to be bold, he quickly stepped into the range of the lurker's claws and kicked his foot out. He felt like his foot would break as it connected below the head of the lurker. Stunned, he planted that same foot down to where his shin was practically touching its beak and drove his sword down into its center mass under the pressure of heavy blow. The sword sunk through its body and into the ground. Just as he thought victory was at hand, the tail lashed into his helmet, causing everything to go black. "I'm sorry," was the first thing Kai heard when he roused to consciousness. Eyes still closed, he checked his health. Health 1150. It was full. His brother must have fed him a health potion while he was out. "Asshole. Why didn't you help?" "I'm sorry," his brother's voice cracked slightly. "You were doing so well. I didn't dare interrupt. And just when I thought you killed it, I relaxed for just a moment." Opening his eyes, everything was a little blurry. Or so he thought. Instead, it was just the cloudy, overcast sky. Still laying on his back, he slipped his helmet off and turned it over. The left side where it had been smashed was slightly dented. "You can check your gains on the way. We need to get out of here now. More are coming." Without waiting for an answer, he picked Kai up and flew down the mountainside. "Your group has slain Mountain Lurker, Adept level 14. Vanguard has reached Forging level 1. Vanguard has reached Forging level 8. Abilities gained. Active Gravity. Well, create a dense sphere of gravity that will exert pull on all objects or beings within its range. Passive Lightfoot. Gravity passively increases acceleration, deacceleration, and momentum while moving. While under increased gravitational effects, your feet will remain light and nimble. General skills gained. Pain tolerance, +1. Soul presence, +1. Elemental magic resistance, +1. Physical resistance, +1. Nothing besides the normal appeared in his realm ascension. The general skills were something he had expected. Nothing was out of the ordinary there. Part of him wished he would have gained more, but there wouldn't be a big difference until his class evolution. Lightfoot was something he wanted, something he needed. A movement-type skill that read like it would synergize well with his gravity. The gravity well was an anomaly. He had absolutely no idea what it would be like. It sounded like his domain, but he could place it away from him and direct gravity there. "Garen, let's find a place to stop. I want to test my new abilities." 15 minutes later, they stopped on flat ground, only a few kilometers away from the capital. The area was mostly sparse and open. They were just close enough to the capital to where they had cleared out the environment to see incoming enemies. From the position of the main sun overhead, it was closing in on dinner time, and he was starving. Walking away from his brother, there was an oddity in his movement that hadn't been there before. He felt like his walking speed had increased, but not only that. It was as if he had been wearing boots made of metal before, and now his feet felt free and light. But that wasn't the case. He was still wearing the same boots he had received from Ashley before. He dashed straight. His feet seemed to glide across the ground. Each step was effortless and light. He ran faster and faster until he achieved a new max speed in half the time than before. Even though his dexterity had remained the same, Lightfoot had helped him achieve a new speed. The wind whipping into his face was a minor annoyance to his joyful mood. The ability also helped him deaccelerate as he stopped abruptly. Normally, stopping at that speed would strain the body, but it felt much easier than before. Taking it a step further, he ran to max speed and quickly changed directions to his right. His body strained as he sharply turned until he was back to his max speed within seconds. For the next few minutes, Kai kept dodging and evading imaginary projectiles as he got a feel for his new passive ability. Lightfoot seemed to help with his state of changing motion. It was a reliable ability to move around the battlefield quickly. Now the main question was how it would perform under increased gravity. Calling upon his domain, he felt the same pressure pushing him down as always. However, instead of his feet sinking a few inches into the dirt or ground like normal, it was as if he hadn't even activated his gravity. It was as if his body wasn't pushing down further on the ground he stood, even with his weight tripling. He walked around getting a feel for it, but it was just like walking around before his weight changed, minus his body feeling heavier. Starting with a sprint, he felt each step slam into the ground, but instead of sinking, his boots just bounced off into the next step. Light and nimble indeed. The application of this ability was fantastic. At higher realms, his gravity would become so powerful that the very ground would collapse under each of his steps. With this ability, that wouldn't happen. Judging by the cough in the near distance, his brother was getting impatient. Kai decided it was time to test his last new ability. The range of his gravity well was 15 meters at the moment. He picked a spot 20 meters away and activated. He felt a huge chunk of his mana drain away that very second, and everything went hectic. Exactly where he had placed the gravity well, Kai didn't see any obvious sign of a spell. What he did see was the area had turned blurry, as if an intense heat had affected just that one spot, distorting the area. Instinctively, he knew the spell was a sphere of some sort, but the distorted image made it difficult to make out as it constantly seemed to pulse and fluctuate. The mountainside was visible on the other side of the blurry sphere, but the image seemed to flow and move back and forth, as if sitting on the waves of an ocean. Loose dirt was carried through the air, as if the winds pick it up and delivered it to the gravity well. Every second, his mana slowly ticked down as the spell continued. More and more dirt traveled to the well, covering it, until the outline of a sphere the size of his body was easily seen. Seconds turned into minutes as the ground lost more and more soil. The gravity kept pulling on each clump of dirt, loosening it until it flew to the well. Stepping into the range of his spell, Kai's body felt strange, as if the world was now wrong. Normally, even under his enhanced gravity, his orientation felt normal. Now, it was like his sense had gone astray. Down was now in front of him, or at least that was what the pull of gravity was telling his body. Still, he felt the normal gravity pulling him down to the ground, but his gravity well's influence was much stronger. He stood there awkwardly, attuning his senses to this new experience. Cancelling his gravity well, the sphere of dirt fell comically a second later. He had one more thing to try before he left. Summoning another gravity well, this one appeared only 1 meter away. The pull of gravity was only slightly stronger now that he was much closer than before. His body resisted the tug and held firm. Taking one step closer, he stuck his hand out slowly. Ready to cancel the spell at a moment's notice, he took the final step and touched his palm to the outer edge. The sensation was beyond abnormal. In his eyes, the space was empty, short of the distortion and dirt already forming around it. But to his hand, the sphere was tangible. The sensation could only be described as if he was touching solidified air. Heavy, dense air seemed to weigh down space and draw all nearby objects to it. He marveled at it until finally his mana ran out and it vanished. Turning around, he proceeded back to his brother, his blood boiled with excitement as victory loomed even closer. Name, Kaismo Cineri. Realm, Level Forging. 8. Aspect, Gravity. Class, Vanguard. Race, Human. Health, 1470. Stamina, 504, 600. Mana, 32, 1100. Vitality, 140, 147. Strength, 120. Dexterity, 60. Endurance, 60. Intelligence, 100. Wisdom, 110. Unspent attributes available, 0. Active skills, Heavy Blow, 210. Gravity Pillar, 2/10. Domain, 2 Cartine. Gravity Well, Car 10. Passive skills, Burden, 10. Lightfoot, 110. General skills, Identify. Pain Tolerance. DOIs, Sense Improvement. 2. Soul Presence. 5. Elemental Magic Resistance. 5. Physical Resistance, 5. Chapter 52, Sand and Wind. The next morning, Kai walked into the waiting area like a conquering hero. Some of his fellow classmates' eyes fell on him, going wide, while others blinked and rubbed their eyes, likely identifying him once more to make sure they were reading it correctly. In only one night, he had gained 10 levels and advanced to the Forging Realm. Yesterday, he would have been the only Foundation Realm fighter among the first years still left. But now he was on par with the other 15 remaining students. Shit, Cineri is in the Forging Realm, he heard someone whisper to another. Quickly, everyone who was there became aware. Judging by the way Jason was wringing his hands, he was either nervous or unhappy about Kai's ascension to the same realm. Not that it mattered to Kai, they had both been ignoring each other since that botched trip 5 months ago. But if Kai was being honest with himself, he still hoped to fight Jason today or tomorrow so he could crush him. There was definitely some unresolved resentment still lingering there. Only a good beating would make him feel better. Not seeing Nicholas around, Kai just took a random seat since there were plenty available. All students who won today would have to fight once more. Since there was no chance of getting a free win, he planned on putting his opponent down as quickly as possible to save on resources. While he wasn't concerned about health, since a potion could easily solve that. Mana and stamina would take a lot longer to recover. Kai's eyes closed as he fell into meditation. Clearing his mind before battle always relaxed and helped him focus. Sitting there, he closed off most of his senses. Eventually, he felt a hum in the air. His ears heard nothing, but there was a sensation of something at the edge of his mind, humming in tempo like a pulse, as if it was alive. Is that gravity? He recalled his gravity well yesterday. The gravity well appeared to pulsate its distorted view. Did that mean gravity wasn't a constant force, but similar to waves from the sea? He tried to focus and examine the sensation, but his concentration was broken as a hand fell on his shoulder. Congratulations are in order. Holy 9, 10 levels overnight. Where the hell did your brother take you? The humming had vanished. He felt disappointed at the loss of the sensation. Turning to Nicholas, he told him the tale of his adventures from yesterday. Though he made sure not to mention his forging realm abilities, since a few others were listening in on his story. Your brother is mad, Nicholas replied. The mountains are more dangerous than ever. There has been a lot more activity lately. It's been making the Ash Wardens nervous. From the sounds above, the tournament was about to begin for the day. Kai ignored the usual announcer banter as he got the crowd riled up. A few minutes later, he heard his name through the noise of the crowd. Lucky for him, he would be fighting in today's first match. Also getting up was one of the students he had been following throughout the tournament, Human Forging Level 4. Sasha was a known sand mage in the academy, not one of a kind like him, but still rare magic for this area. Her magic and ability to create and manipulate sand were quite powerful as she bent it to her will. Her favorite ability was creating sand golems and sending them to her opponents. Giving the sandy blonde-haired student a once-over, her nervous expression told him she wasn't happy to be fighting him. We are in for a treat today, folks, Kenny the announcer screamed with energy. The only student to make it to the top 16 that was in the Foundation realm has now ascended to the Forging realm overnight. Gaining a whopping 10 levels, the underdog turned new favorite to win. On the field of battle, Kai couldn't help but grin a little. He knew the announcer was just revving up the audience some more, but the man was right. Yesterday he had been the underdog, but now no longer. He felt the loss of his sword in his hand, but had chosen to leave it with Nicholas, opting to only bring his mace into this battle. Holding his mace up, he pointed the round, spiky end at Sasha. Surrender, he commanded. If he could get away without fighting and exposing his new abilities, the better shape he would be in for the next fight today. She looked as if she was actually considering it. Pivoting her head, she stared out into the audience for a few seconds before shaking it with refusal. Kai could only shrug at her response. It wasn't like he expected anything different. Any student who made it this far wouldn't just give up. Then she did something he wasn't expecting. She placed her staff down and began unstrapping her armor, all of it. In a surprising move, Sasha is taking off her armor. Will her gambit work or utterly fail? The audience clamored at her unexpected move. Picking up the armor, she walked it over to the edge of the arena and placed it down before returning to position. The only item she had kept was the staff, though Kai wasn't sure if that was meant to amplify her magic or a melee weapon of some sort. After all, he had never seen her in his melee tactics course. It was a clever move. Taking off her armor would reduce her weight, not only allowing her to move quicker, but also reducing the pressure and stress on her body when his gravity inevitably pulled on her. Sand was an odd element to control. It had the potential to be very powerful. Some of the most annoying people he had ever fought in his past life were sand mages, often absorbing the blood he created with his magic. Also, the fact that each grain of sand was a tiny projectile made it quite annoying to defend against. But that wasn't even the worst part. No, the most annoying aspect about sand was that it got everywhere. All right, we've waited long enough. The audience wants to see some blood. Begin. Summoning a gravity pillar over Sasha, he started running to her, not wanting to give her time to make her sand creations as he tried to immobilize her. Predicting his tactic, a cloud of sand formed in his way, blocking his vision. Covering his eyes with his arm, he ran through. Emerging, he noticed Sasha was still in the same place as before, but 3 piles of sand were already beginning to take shape between them. Kai continued running. Ignoring the forming humanoid sand golems, he passed right by before they fully formed. Sasha didn't appear worried as he closed in on her. His mace swung at her legs as she stood there unmoving. Instantaneously, sand enveloped her entire being, making her appear like one of her creations behind him. Just when he expected to see blood and bone as his mace crashed into her legs, sand exploded as his mace passed through near effortlessly. Kai realized he had been duped. Sasha had switched places with one of her sand golem creations. All that remained behind was her staff and sand. Interesting. Lifting the mace high, he slammed it into the head of the golem as it reached out to him, causing sand to fly in all directions. Turning around, the 2 golems were moving towards him as they slid across the ground, their legs unmoving. Behind them, another was taking shape. Sasha stood behind the third with wide eyes, knowing that if she had missed her timing, her legs would have been obliterated. With some fully formed bodyguards, Kai didn't recklessly charge in. His eyes shifted, looking for a clear path. The only safe way was to go around the golems and hope they couldn't keep up. Bolting to the right, the golems shifted quicker than he had expected, moving around until they blocked him from getting to Sasha again. Having seen enough, he summoned his new ability, Gravity Well, placing a meter behind Sasha, making sure the golems were in the range of its effects. The results were immediate. Sand began draining away from the golems. At first, it was a small amount, barely visible as it flew through the air right past a stunned Sasha, who herself was struggling to stay upright as she leaned forward as if she was climbing up a mountain slope. Quickly, more sand began shifting away as if the wind was destroying her creations. "Move!" Sasha yelled, anxiety in her voice. The golems were coming at him, but at a slower pace than before. More and more sand began falling off the golem as it started visibly collecting onto the sphere of dense gravity. The golems seemed to vibrate, losing their forms as they struggled to retain their shape. Some of the sand hovered in the air, shaking as it pitifully tried to fight the gravity. Sasha's face was turning flushed as she struggled to keep control of her sand. Each grain was being pulled away by the inevitability of a fundamental force. It was pointless. There was too much sand to control and manipulate individually. The golems were breaking apart, section by section. But still, Kai remained cautious. It only took half a minute for the first golem to collapse completely. Breaking apart, the sand moved like a cloud and collected on the well. The other 2 were barely holding on. Half of their sand was already missing. Their backsides were completely gone. Sasha's body shook a little as she tried to retain control of her sand. But as long as Kai fed mana to his gravity well, it would do its autonomous work of pulling on everywhere nearby. Deciding it was time to end the fight, Kai walked into the gravity well's range. He traveled fast across the ground, ready to react at a moment's notice to any sand. Passing between the golems, they each stretched out an arm to grab him, but all that happened was their arms and hands disintegrating as the well took away their sand. A few moments later, he assumed she gave up control of the remaining golems, when large amounts of sand quickly flew past him. Free of keeping the golems from falling apart, she began constructing a dozen spears of sand above her head. Only his gravity well was already tearing them apart just as fast as she could create them. Kai could see it in her eyes when she realized. Tens of thousands of grains of sand, all individually fighting against the unending pull of gravity. Changing tactics, she let go of her half-destroyed sand spears and focused on one which rapidly took shape and launched it at him. The projectile flew much slower than he had seen in her other matches. Sidestepping it, he easily evaded the spear. Kai noticed Sasha's eyes welling up with tears that also were carried away by gravity. She neither moved nor avoided him as he approached. Once he was 2 meters from her, she lowered her arm and stared at the ground near his feet. She might not have said it yet, but her mind and body had already surrendered the fight. Kai didn't care to wait for her to surrender. Planting his foot against her chest, he pushed. Sasha flew back until she crashed into the pile of sand surrounding his gravity well, where she appeared stuck as her feet were floating off the ground, her body attached to the well. Apparently the adjudicators had seen enough because the match was called the very next second. With an overwhelming victory, Kai has moved into the top 8. Kai released his gravity well, causing Sasha to fall to the ground. She looked so pitiful as she stared down at the ground. Approaching her, she flinched back. It was a bad matchup, he claimed as he held out his hand. His mana was still at 3/4 and his health hadn't been touched. Truthfully, the match had been a lot easier than his last. Tentatively reaching up, she grabbed onto his hand and hoisted herself up. "You better win it all," she grinned with watery eyes before she fled the arena. Kai's foot tapped nervously as he watched the current match from the window. He was nervous because tomorrow he would finally know if he would be attending Prime Academy or not. The second and third years were finishing their first matches for the day. This was done to give some time to the first years so that they could recover their mana. Likely only the super wealthy students had mana potions hidden away in their rings. With all the excitement from yesterday, Kai had forgotten to find out where those mana potions could be found. And now his brother was once again in the wind. After dropping Kai off at the academy gates, he left with a short goodbye and a vague message that he would be in touch. He hadn't even wished him good luck. Kai shook his head, having no idea what to think of their relationship. 2 short hours later, the first years were back on rotation. A smile came to his face as he heard who he would be fighting against. Turning to the man in question, Jason was staring right back at him. His face was devoid of the usual arrogance and sneering. Human, forging level 19. Changing his mace for the sword, he calmly walked to the arena, leaving his back exposed as a subtle taunt at Jason. Just like Kai, Jason's weapon of choice was a short sword. They had spared a few times in their melee tactics class, where Kai had power and strength and Jason used speed and feints. Kai assumed Jason had more passive abilities than him, some that subtly helped him out in those non-magic spars. When it came down to those non-magic fights, though, Kai had begun winning most of them towards the end of the year when he became more accustomed to Jason's tricks and feints. A pattern was beginning to form as Jason followed him onto the field without his armor. Clearly, everyone had decided that his gravity was enough of a nuisance that they needed to lighten themselves against him. He was certain it would benefit Jason more than it had Sasha, since Jason's air magic helped him move around. Kai gave Jason a taunting smile. His response was the usual glare that lacked the arrogance it typically held. The match began under the roar of the crowd. Testing the waters, he placed a gravity pillar over Jason. He frowned when Jason moved out of it almost instantly. Cancelling it, Kai placed another one on top of him, trying to slow the bastard down. Only for him to escape that one too. The problem was they were too small to effectively keep him in it before Kai could make up the distance and get to him. Instead of approaching Kai, Jason dashed to the side, keeping close to the arena's edge. Distortions in the air formed above him as he moved, followed by a noise like the wind howling that became louder as crescent blades made of concentrated air shot at Kai. Striking down the first, his blade sliced through the fast-moving crescent air attack, dissipating it. Before he could strike down the next, it crashed into his shoulder, forcing him to take a step back. He felt a sting of air on his bicep where he lacked armor. Blood seeped out of a new cut on his arm. Ignoring the pain, he returned to chasing Jason. Jason was putting his speed to the test as he kept his distance from Kai. Apparently, his plan was to incapacitate Kai from a distance. The large arena was allowing the dexterous wind warrior to kite Kai around. Luckily for Kai, Domain was no longer his only wide-area gravity effect ability. His mana took a dip when a gravity well formed to the side of both fighters. Caught in the pull, the air attacks shifted off target as they passed by Kai. His well had pulled on them just enough to make them miss. Now that they were both under the influence of his gravity, they both moved slower. Though Kai's speed was less reduced than Jason's. Growling, Jason stopped firing and focused on running right out of his gravity well. Not giving him a break, Kai cancelled his gravity well and spawned another to their side once again, closer than the last. Proving his intelligence, Jason began firing crescent airblade after crescent airblade at him, intentionally aiming at the opposite side of Kai from the gravity well, so his well pulled them into the direction of Kai's body. Doing what he could, Kai tried to dodge the air attacks, but they were too numerous and fast. Placing his arms in an X pattern, he felt the impact of the blades hitting his armor. Each hit sounded like a solid object had bashed against his armor. A warm breeze blew against his exposed arms and legs that stung new cuts that had formed. Peeking at his mana, he had already used 2/3 of it. This made him regret not having any true ranged attacks right now. Again, Jason had escaped his well, though the distance had shrunk more. The very second he cancelled his gravity well, Jason turned and sprinted at Kai, surprising him. Before Jason had even made it to him, the wind had begun to pick up as if an unsettling storm was coming. Their swords met in a clash of steel and iron. Drawing back, Kai struck, keeping his swing short and compact as he made sure not to overextend. Domain activated over the two right as Kai's sword slammed down onto Jason's, causing Jason's to nearly drop out of his hands because of the sudden power behind the blow. Recovering quickly, Jason struck back, forcing Kai to dodge. Despite being new to fighting under increased gravity, Jason was able to react and keep up with Kai. His face was the picture of concentration as they exchanged blows. It was almost a dance as they circled around one another, trading strikes. Despite his misgivings about Jason, Kai had to admit the young warrior was putting up the best fight he experienced during the tournament yet. Their blades slid against each other. Taking a step forward, Kai pushed at the weaker warrior. Shifting his grip, Jason slid the blade down and moved his arms up and pushed up, causing Kai's blade to move out of the way. Kai felt his body turn cold for a second as Jason's sword scraped against the side of his chest piece. Taking one hand off his handle, he slapped the sword away with his forearm guard. Irritated, Kai gave Jason no mercy as he struck his sword down again and again. Jason held his blade defensively across his body, waiting to block the next strike until Kai swung down with heavy blow, shattering his defense. "Ah!" Jason screamed as the tip of Kai's blade ran over down his chest. Blood slowly leaked out of the shallow wound. Taking advantage of Kai's overextended sword that was touching the ground, Jason spun, elbowing Kai in the side of his helmet. Barely phased, Kai grabbed onto his arm and pulled him in closer, headbutting him. Dazed, Jason stumbled back. Right as Kai was about to finish him, Jason pushed his hand out, creating a giant gust that pushed him away a few meters. Kai barely budged as the wind stung his wounds. Jason looked ragged as he got back into a stance. Giving him a grin, Kai said, "You should know my gravity helps drain your stamina much faster, and that's not including the added energy you've been using to move in increased gravity." A look of understanding passed by Jason's face. The match had already been going on for a while now, and he must have realized his stamina was draining quicker than it was supposed to. Kai's body was used to performing in this gravity. Time to end the match. Before Jason could even think of gaining distance again, Kai formed another gravity well right in his path. Reacting to the sudden appearance of the gravity well, Jason pushed his hand out as powerful winds helped blast him away from the dense sphere of gravity, only to find himself next to Kai, who had predicted his movement. Slamming his sword down, Jason barely evaded the blow. Kai attacked with the ferocity of a hungry wolf, giving Jason no time to breathe, let alone counter his unrelenting strikes. Low to the ground, Jason placed his palm out to push himself away again, only for Kai to grab the front of his shirt. The shirt tore as the wind howled at Kai's face. The sound of Jason's ragged breath brought a smile to Kai's face. The bastard had been evading him most of the match, but his passive burden had drained his stamina before he even ran out of mana. Lacking the energy to escape, Jason feebly held his blade up to block as Kai struck. Jason's sword crashed into the ground away from the fighters. Stretching his hand out, he caught Jason by the throat and lifted him up, so his feet dangled off the ground. He made sure not to squeeze too hard. Jason appeared like he had been mugged on the streets. Bleeding, with torn clothes and dim eyes, he had given up. An impulse of anger flashed over Kai as he remembered when they first met. "Know your place." Dropping his own sword, Kai punched Jason in his stomach with heavy blow before the officials could call the match. Letting go of Jason at the same time, the Wind Warrior soared through the air and crashed a few meters away. Jason struggled for breath as he switched between gasping for air and throwing up, curled up on the ground. Turning away, he walked back to the waiting room, leaving Jason on the ground where he belonged. Winner Kaismo. Chapter 53. The Unexpected. Kai watched Nicholas's match with rapt attention. After all, there was a chance he might have to fight against him if he made it through the next round. Nicholas's style of sword fighting was similar to his own. He relied on his power to pressure and crush his opponents. Even with the great sword in his hands, he was agile and dexterous. A scream rang out as Nicholas literally chopped off his opponent's arm. The healers would be able to fix that in a matter of minutes, but it still left psychological scars on those who couldn't handle the pain and trauma. Kai wasn't proud of this, but the first time he lost a limb, he ended up hiding in a city for a month. Despite his limb being restored, not even a day later, he wasn't willing to go out until Lucian dragged him out of the city and back into a fight. In any unsurprising victory, Nicholas was announced as the winner and the first among all the students to make it into the finals. Kai was up on his feet the moment he heard his name. He gave a side glance to his opponent, Michael Wilson, a student whom he had often sparred against in his melee tactics class. If he was being honest, he probably lost more times than he won against Michael. The man was a prodigal sword user, and while Kai had put in an incredible amount of effort training this year, Michael trained often, despite his tremendous natural skill. Michael was well known among the first years for being the strongest fire magic user. It was an impressive title, considering fire was one of the most popular and common element types among humans in the Ashbone Kingdom. If Nicholas hadn't attended the academy, Michael would have been the favorite to win the tournament. Human, forging level 21. With dirty blonde hair, Michael stood a head taller than Kai. He possessed a roguishly handsome face that had been rumored to help him bed a quarter of the female students. Despite his rumored activities, Kai found himself liking Michael. The man was down to earth and lacked the arrogance typically seen in those who stood at the top of their year. Michael was one of the students he had honestly hoped not to fight. If Nicholas or Michael could have knocked each other out of the running, his run in the tournament would have been a lot easier. He had long acknowledged Michael as one of his greatest obstacles to winning the tournament. The man gave him a feeling similar to Alistair of the third-year students. They both had great focus and drive. As the son of a mere knight, Michael had ascended to his current level without any family aid. Imitating Kai's previous opponents, Michael began unequipping his armor, knowing it would do nothing but slow him down in the fight against Kai. It was a calculated risk and a smart one. Kai would have nothing to damage him at a distance, and all Michael had to do was be the better swordsman as they fought. If Kai couldn't best Michael with his sword, even under his own gravity, then he would have no chance of winning. Unfortunately, his gravity wasn't strong enough to completely debilitate Michael. Heading out to the arena, he left his mace with Nicholas. There was a time and place for such a brutish weapon, but this wasn't it. Michael and he had both spared together with swords in their class, and so their match would be concluded with swords. Besides, Kai was under no illusion that he was adept at using the mace yet. It would hinder him more than help in this match, where the sword would bring victory or defeat. Out on the field, Michael gave him a grin. "I can see from your smile that you are looking forward to this," Michael said. Kai didn't even know he was smiling. "I could say the same about you," Kai chuckled, looking at the wide grin coming from Michael. He looked at Michael's bare torso. The man had even removed his shirt. Thankfully, he had kept his pants on. "Are you sure you don't want to wear armor? Aren't you cold?" Kai teased. Shaking his head, Michael readied his longsword. "I'm sure my fire will warm us both up." Without waiting for the announcer to officially start the match, Michael ran to Kai, longsword at the ready. Gravity pillar fell into place onto Michael, his speed visibly slowing. Still, he ran out of it quickly. Halfway to Kai, Michael let go of his sword with one hand and put out a palm facing Kai. A fireball shot out of his hand across the field quickly. There was no way Kai was bold or confident enough to take a fireball head-on, even if he thought he would survive it. He jumped to the side as Lightfoot came into play. Still, he felt the heat scorch his right side as it passed by. For a moment he felt his step become even lighter before it returned to normal. Right as Michael came into his domain range, he activated it. Instantly, Michael's eyes darkened as he stepped into the gravity field. Holding his hand over the bottom of his blade, he swept it up to the top, causing fire to sprout and surround his blade. Walking up to each other, they held their blades in guard positions as they circled one another. Since Michael had the longer blade and arms, Kai decided to strike first and not let him dictate control of the match. Their swords clashed as fire licked Kai's blade. Heat emanated from Michael as his skin began turning red. In response, Kai's armor glowed even more brightly, the wisps more pronounced as it absorbed the heat from his opponent and lightened its weight. Kai's initiative didn't last long as he felt himself backing up slowly. Michael had begun pressuring him. Avoiding a stab to his stomach, Kai sidestepped and struck back at Michael's arm, only to be repelled. Swinging wide, Michael's sword swung at his side. Turning his body, Kai blocked the blow by jumping back to dissipate the force. Kai's arms strained as he blocked another strike from Michael. The man was showing that even encumbered slightly, he could perform his sword abilities. Using his favorite overhead strike, he knocked Michael's sword out of the way as the gravity increased the power of his strike down as it pulled on both sword and arms. Before he could capitalize on Michael's broken defense, his boot kicked away Kai's sword in a surprising move. The battle quickly turned into a dance. Both matched each other as they gracefully fought. Even the slightest mistake could mean losing or death. The roar of the audience had dimmed. Kai's focus was purely on the individual in front of him. Each shift and movement gave away Michael's next move. The stalemate was broken when Michael's blade pushed past him, bashing on his shoulder guard. The powerful blow wrenched his body down for a moment. Kai was immediately thankful Nock had created such wonderful armor. The tournament would have ended there if he hadn't been wearing it. Smashing his blade against Michael's, heat licked Kai's face as their blades held strong against each other. The flames on the sword were obstructing his view. Pulling his sword back, he broke the stalemate. As the flames shifted on the sword, Michael was grinning as an orange glow appeared to emulate from below his chest. Looking down, he realized his mistake as Michael launched a stream of fire into his own chest, point blank. Kai's eyes flashed white as he was temporarily blinded as fire flashed over his body and face. Stumbling back, he felt his armor lighten immediately. For a moment, his armor lightened as it turned uncomfortably warm. Everything had become blurry. Blinking didn't help, his vision remained blurred. He felt the heat before it hit him. The next second, fire once again washed over his face. There was a searing pain as his skin bubbled and burned. Inhaling was a mistake. The heat and smoke burned his lungs after one deep breath. His only saving grace was that he had managed to close his eyes before the flames reached his face. Shuffling back, his domain still active as he tried to buy time for his eyesight to return. Through his fuzzy vision, he saw a pale and black silhouette approaching him quickly. Acting on pure instinct, he guarded his body by placing his forearm in front of his body, just as Michael's sword slammed into the armor, wrenching it down. He muffled his cry as he jumped back. Pain flared up as he grabbed his sword's handle with both hands. Might be broken, he thought. Vision clearing, he suddenly created a gravity well behind Michael. With the changing orientation of gravity, Kai charged in the split second of Michael's confusion and adjustment. Between the gravity well pulling on him and Lightfoot, he reached Michael faster than the man had guessed. Kai could see it. Michael's blade was still pulled back to strike at Kai, not expecting him to already be in front of him, nor had he accounted for the pull on his sword and arm, slowing him down slightly. Not wanting to accidentally kill Michael, he lowered his shoulder and bulldozed into the unarmored man. Instead of falling, Michael jumped back with the blow, landing on his feet as he slid a few meters. Recovering, they slammed their swords into each other. Ragged breaths escaped both of their mouths. Their blades pushed against each other in an attempt to gain the upper hand. The only problem was Kai started losing the pushing contest as the pain in his arm crippled some of his strength. Sliding his hand down the blunt side of the blade, he placed the palm of his hand at the tip end of his blade and pushed with renewed strength. Using the extra leverage, he dug his toes into the ground as he pushed even harder. His muscles strained as Michael began losing ground, moving back step by step. Their blades held strong despite the strain on them. He had to trust his blade wouldn't break against a mere forging realm human. Drawing back suddenly with a hand on each side of the blade, Kai used heavy blow and crashed his sword into Michael's. The unexpected force caused Michael's blade to fly out of his hands. Letting go of the top of the blade, he whipped his sword at the neck of a frozen Michael, stopping as it touched flesh. Michael's mouth opened, but no words came out. As his eyes found Kai's, he finally said, "I surrender." "Winner Kaismo!" screamed the announcer. A group of healers appeared the next moment, healing his and Michael's injuries the next second. Returning to the waiting arena, he was greeted by the only remaining first year left, Nicholas. Giving him a smile, Nicholas held out a blue vial that looked oddly familiar. "Here." Taking it, he gripped it tightly. "Why?" Kai asked. His mana was very low. It was likely that he and Nicholas would fight before Kai's mana even returned to half, thus giving the prince the advantage. "Why?" Nicholas laughed. "If I'm going to fight my best friend, then I want a match to be as even as possible." It was a small gesture, but the sides of Kai's mouth curled up a little. Downing the potion, his mana began returning to him. To this day, he still hadn't told Nicholas of his intentions to go to Titan Prime. He briefly thought of telling him, but he quickly dismissed it. He felt bad, but he didn't want Nicholas to hold back when they fought. Only through winning the tournament legitimately would he earn the right to attend Prime Academy. Anyone who watched the two for the next hour could tell Nicholas and Kai were good friends. The entire time the other years were concluding their semi-finals, they talked. Not about the upcoming match, but about anything else. If Kai was honest with himself, it helped ground his nerves. It wasn't much surprise when Alistair made it into the finals. He was without a doubt the favourite to win after having won the past 2 years. Now, the fight you have all been waiting for, Nicholas Gilmanash, the 12th Prince of the Ashbourne Kingdom, Ash Juggernaut, versus Kaismo Cineris, Gravity Vanguard. Please come to the arena. Sitting next to Nicholas, he smirked at Kai. "You ready?" Nicholas asked, handing him his mace. "Yeah," he said, standing. "Are you going to get in trouble when you lose?" Kai asked jokingly. "A month or 2 in the dungeons. Not to worry, the rats will keep me company." They both ended up laughing as they walked out of the arena side by side. Separating, they each went to their respective side and turned to face the other. Closing his eyes for a moment, he inhaled a deep breath of the warm, humid air. The plan, as always, was to get next to his opponent and beat him down. Just this time, it was one of his close friends. If he couldn't go all out against Nicholas, he felt like he would have no chance if he ever confronted Lucian in the future. His eyes shot open when suddenly there was the dreaded and familiar heaving of the earth. Within a few seconds, the intensity had already ramped up to the previous quake and then surpassed it. Sounds of crumbling rock, screaming and cries rang out all around. Kai watched in horror as part of the audience's seating collapsed, falling into the empty space of the waiting area below. Some people had taken flight as they escaped the shaking of the ground. Falling to his knees, he waited it out. Less than a minute later, the shaking subsided. Guards were running around trying to help others. The royal booth was a flurry of activity, people leaving and coming at a rapid pace, exchanging looks with Nicholas. They both knew the finals would be put on hold. Then it happened again. Shaking, it wasn't even close to as bad as before. The ground shook for a second, then stopped. An aftershock? A few seconds later, there were heavy tremors again, only this time they were a little more intense. It wasn't enough to knock down buildings or anything, but it could be felt. Appearing as a prelude to a disaster, Akane teleported next to Kai. Not even sparing him a glance, she growled facing the location of the unseen Ashbourne Mountains. The enchantments blocked the sight of the ever-imposing mountains. The shaking and heaving of the ground intensified as it continued. It wasn't like any earthquake he had ever felt. It was too rhythmic. Despite the injured and trapped people below, the arena began quieting down. It was the calm before the storm. The only thing ruining the silent moment was the increased shuddering and shaking every few seconds. Then a sound the likes he had never heard before started reverberating throughout the city, loud and high-pitched. Over the sound of the audience clamoring, he was able to make out what the sirens were for. Monster incoming. Chapter 54. City under attack. Monster incoming. Spoken words that under normal circumstances shouldn't have been a cause for alarm in such a prominent large city surrounded by massive 50-meter-tall walls. The guards moved as if a literal fire was lit under their asses. What could possibly raise such concern from them? The answer came to him a moment later in the form of the ground shaking for a mere second, followed by more shaking. A monster was coming, a beast so large and heavy it literally shook the ground as it traveled. Faint compared to the earthquake, but Kai could easily feel the increasing intensity as it drew closer. Everyone, begin evacuating the city. Anyone who can fly, begin by bringing others outside the city walls on the southwest side. All others, head for the southern gate immediately. Up in the royal booth, the king and many others took flight and quickly vanished from sight as they went east where the Ashbourne Mountains stood, opposite of the direction given to the evacuees. The arena was tucked away in the northeast side of the city, which happened to be on the same side of the Ashbourne Mountains, where all the knights, nobles, and royalty began flying toward. Hundreds of people began flying away, carrying someone, most likely a family. Meanwhile, there were still tens of thousands just inside the arena. If they are evacuating everyone, does this mean they have no hope of stopping the monster from getting into the city? The thought chilled Kai's body. Even in his past life, when everything was half-assed and rushed, monsters barely made it through city or town walls. And that was with wood and regular stone. Ash stone was without a doubt better than regular stone, especially since they had used it to build a wall next to an infamous monster-infested mountain range. The next second, Nicholas yelled something as a man wearing a royal guard's armor teleported next to him. Nicholas's arm extended towards Kai in a hopeless gesture as he was forcibly flown away and out of sight a few moments later. Looking around awkwardly, Kai wasn't sure if anyone was coming for him. If his brother was going to help him leave the city, then he should have come to him by now. No one was even paying attention to him anymore. It was every person for themselves, practically. He would have to rely on himself to find a safe way out. Already half the stands had emptied as people piled in and rushed through the exits. Sheathing his sword, Kai kept the mace in hand since he didn't have a place to store it. Running through the waiting area, his armor returned to normal weight. Akane followed closely. She didn't display any of her usual signs of goofiness and gluttony, which he appreciated. Exiting the arena, the area outside was a madhouse. People were streaming from the auditorium seating sections. Most were collecting onto the one main road that led to the central square and out of the southern exit. Others were taking side roads, and while Kai thought of following them to escape the crowd, there was no guarantee they were heading straight out of the city. Kai wasn't confident enough in his navigational skills to make it through the side roads. Above him, the lights were gone. Sometime between when he entered the waiting area and left the arena, the enchantments giving artificial light had been turned off. The sky that had been blocked was now visible. Dark, angry clouds covered the city, an ominous sign of the coming apocalypse. In the distance, the Ashbourne Mountains were unusually dark. Smoke was billowing into the sky, merging with the dark clouds above. It looked absolutely sinister. Kai felt a terrible foreboding. "Let's get out of here, Akane," Kai called out. Picking the fox up so she didn't get stepped on, he waded into the crowd. No one dallied as they all ran south. The thumping intensified. People were growing more frenzied as they started pushing others to get by. It was absolute anarchy as tens of thousands of people were hurdled onto one street, all trying to escape. Then everyone stopped. Kai's hands flew to his ears, trying to block the horrifying roar, louder than anything he had ever heard. For a moment he thought he turned deaf as he removed his hands. It had turned silent. Looking at his hands, they were shaking uncontrollably. It wasn't the volume of the roar that had terrified him. No, there was something instinctual laced into it that frightened him. He wasn't the only one. As if the sound had only just returned, people began panicking as they screamed loudly. Children cried as they took their hands off their ears, only to find them soaked in blood. The situation had turned even more chaotic as everyone struggled to escape with renewed fervor. A woman's frightened scream rang out, followed by the sound of a collapsing building nearby. Emerging from the rubble, an ashen-winged man shot into the sky back to the east. Kai could have sworn it looked like the king, or one of his sons. Kai watched the top of the eastern walls for any signs of fighting. Even though it was far away, his enhanced senses allowed him to see it clearly. The pounding of the earth had paused only for a few extra moments before it continued once again. Monstrous sounds arose from the unseen side of the wall. A battle of epic proportions was taking place, the likes of which he had never seen or experienced before. He didn't know what he expected to see as its visage began appearing over the southeast walls. Scales as black as the darkest nights were his first sight, followed by the rest of its head. Golden eyes stared down its elongated snout as it peered over the city walls. Crodillion. Kai hadn't been expecting to see its level, but judging by the fact he could identify it from here meant it was absolutely massive if that wasn't obvious by the fact it was already towering over the walls. The monster continued to rise high and higher until a mane of gold that almost seemed to be made out of living lava was in sight. Following, unusually long crocodilian arms came into view as it pressed down against the top of the walls, its claws gripping the edge as if for balance. Why? Why is it coming to the city? Something of this size, of this power attacking the city had to be intentional. Something or someone must have baited it. Wait, could someone even bait a creature of such immense strength? This monster probably lived in the mountains among the lava and flames. Even if the volcano had erupted because of the earthquakes, it probably wouldn't have been bothered by it. More screaming echoed around him as the massive walls came crashing down. Once, though impenetrable, they hadn't even lasted half a minute since the creature had appeared next to the wall. Its bipedal body shuffled through, making the hole in the wall larger. Magic exploded all over its body. Hundreds of humans were fighting it, but their attacks were ineffective, as if they were throwing pebbles at a boulder. Still, some attacks actually looked like they managed to hurt the bipedal crocodile lion monster. Arms swinging so fast that to Kai's eyes they were a blur, impacted and turned the defenders into paste. Even without its magic, the Crodillion's physical prowess was a sight to behold. Knights and royal guards that were probably the pinnacle among the soldiers in this kingdom were turned into fodder before the great monster. People who had spent 20, 50, and 100 years leveling were killed in a matter of seconds. All their gains and effort for naught against a seemingly impossible foe. Akane snorted, watching the monster rampage through the city. The only thing that could impress her was food, apparently. But Kai was plenty impressed. Terrified, actually. From below in the city, magic splashed against the monster. It was difficult to tell if the magic being shot at it was doing any damage to those dark scales or just merely scratching an itch. Responding to the attacks, the creature's mouth opened incredibly wide, an orange glow emerging inside of it, followed by lava. A volcano all on its own, it blanketed multiple city blocks in lava. Kai imagined the houses and cobbled ground had turned into a molten wasteland. All those who hadn't been able to escape the area were gone without a doubt. It was mesmerizing and horrifying to watch the battle unfold. There was no holding back against the colossal beast. Crowds of what it probably considered insects swarmed around the IT. Running down its back, a swordsman had pierced the scales as he dragged his sword across its body. But what was a 1-meter-deep wound to a creature larger than the palace? The air surrounding the creature was blurred, as if the air itself was burning. Without even being directly attacked, dozens of people fell out of the sky, crashing out of sight, all most likely dead. Fire countered, streaming from multiple sources as it washed across the monster's scales. A deep, guttural laugh resounded from the Crodillion before it snapped its jaws extremely fast, catching someone who had been flying too close. The battle had gotten close enough for Kai to hear, "Fire is completely ineffective. Get back, Griffin. Watch out, it's spraying lava again." "Your Majesty, please escape," screamed a soldier nearby desperately. In the air in front of the monster, Kai spied the king, bloody and bruised in a ripped robe, floating with demonic-looking ashen wings. His dexterous hands flowed so fast and gracefully as spears created of ash and magic pierced into the Crodillion one after another. It wasn't until one pierced its eye that the creature became angry. Claws slashed through the air, barely missing the king as he dodged. More and more strikes followed. The power behind each strike was enough to destroy the houses below, just from the wind coming off it. Between the monster and the dozens of fighters remaining, the city was on its way to quickly being destroyed. And if he didn't escape, it would be his turn. The southern exit was no longer an option. The Crocodilian was too close, and it was growing closer. Every step it took crossed half a block. The western exit. It's my only hope. Running down a side path, he hoped he could navigate himself to the western exit. The problem was that it was the furthest exit from his current location. Even running at a quick pace, it would take an estimated 20 minutes to get there, assuming he didn't get lost on the way. Just make it to the wall and follow it down, he thought, hopeful of escaping this nightmare situation. Lightfoot was coming in clutch as he sprinted down street after street. Many others were doing the same, apparently all having the same idea as him. Kai kept moving for the exit of the city. The sounds of the great battle loomed behind him. Even at his peak, he would have been fodder in this battle. Thump! Thump! The footsteps grew closer, faster than he could escape them. The most inhuman, menacing voice echoed through the capital. Too long has this city been encroaching on my home. You cause the shaking. You cause the noise. I will kill you all. Letting out a high-pitched yell, Kai watched horrified as the Crocodilian's mouth opened once more. Instead of a specific target, massive chunks of lava splattered into the air, arcing deeper into the city. Kai ducked. It was stupid and pointless, but it was his first instinct to make himself smaller. Blankets of lava soared over his head as it crashed down nearby. He watched as the lava engulfed people. Screams were suddenly cut short as their bodies literally vanished. Houses disappeared. The city was turning into a molten pool of lava. The area's temperature had turned unbearably oppressive. He was having trouble breathing. His armor was thriving as it absorbed all the heat, lightening itself. Around him, his path had been blocked off by lava. His only path was to retreat back to the monster and find a way around the lava, and fast. If he didn't escape, he would suffocate. Akane was still curled around his neck protectively. She remained oddly silent as the ensuing chaos happened all around them. It took a few minutes to find a makeshift path past the lava. In the meantime, the remaining fighters hadn't given up. Just when Kai thought he was in the home stretch to the western gate, a human collided with the cobbled road, sending stone everywhere. Having recognized him, Kai ran to the old man. Professor Davenport. Sitting up, Professor Davenport screamed in a panicked voice, "No, stay back, Kai." Stopping, Kai's eyes widened. His wizened-looking professor was missing his arm and part of his skull. The man's brain was literally exposed to the outside air, yet the Davenport looked unbothered, as if he wasn't yet aware of the fact that his brain was unprotected. Kai realized at that moment two things. One, the old man before him wasn't marred by fire or burns, and two, he had fallen from the opposite direction of where the Crocodilian was currently. From above, he heard someone call out, "A student? Oh, I recognize you. You're that shit commoner who managed to climb his way to the finals. I was thoroughly impressed by you, considering this shithole of a kingdom is so full of trash." In the sky, floating in the air, was the Academy's headmistress's, Lin. His instincts screamed enemy, as if that wasn't obvious by a glance. Drawing his sword, he knew it was a futile gesture against people of their power. "Professor, your head," Kai whispered when Davenport stood. "I know," he said, patting the exposed area. "She snuck up on me." Ash covered the man, taking the shape of a knight's armor. On each arm were 4 whips of ash, floating out into the air before him. "Listen, Kai." His voice was deeper under the ash. "She has been hiding everything. She's an illusion and void master. Everything is her fault. The monster, the earthquakes, the bears. She must be working for the Heart Empire." A historical laugh rang out. "Well, you are almost right. I guess you can say that I am doing this on behalf of the Heart Empire, but that's not who I am working for." She seemed happy as her nasally voice grated on Kai's ears. She wasn't even looking at them, though. His eyes were focused on the Crocodilian in the near distance. From the increasing reverberations in the ground, it was coming towards him again. Who knew if anyone remained to stand against it? "Who are you working for?" Davenport yelled questioningly. Cocking her head, her mouth widened in a disgusting grin. What does it matter? Dead man tells no tales. You need to find people and tell them. We can't let her get away with this. Run as fast as you can. I'll buy you as much time as possible. The professor turned ashen night, vanished from the ground, and instantly appeared next to the traitor. Kai didn't even spare them a glance. He shot off, across the ground, turning on the next street. His optimism soared when he saw the western gate in the distance. He ran full speed down the straight, empty road until he crashed full force into air. Shaking his head, he placed his hand in front of him. He felt something solid, as if the very air had turned into a wall. Magically appearing against his hand was a house in his path. Not just in his path, but his entire surroundings had changed. He had been caught in an illusion. He had thought he was home free, but in actuality he was being played by the headmistress, if her maniacal laughing from above was anything to gauge from. "Oh, that was too easy. You low-realm trash are too stupid to know any better," she gloated. Crashing onto the ground next to Kai was a body belonging to Professor Dravenport. The elderly man was dead. A massive gaping hole was now where his chest and stomach used to be. 30 seconds hadn't even passed. If she was able to kill someone who had been alive almost 1,300 years so quickly, what did that mean for her power? The 7th realm? The 8th? Or maybe even higher? He stood absolutely no chance. "Well, you weren't really my target, but you know sometimes you're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I can't exactly have you telling everyone it was me. Not that they would believe you, but you're just sitting right there." Sorry, I didn't mean to keep talking. Sometimes it's so much fun to narrate as I kill others." She gave Kai a wicked smile. Lifting her palm up, an orb of void magic spawned in it. "Don't worry, you won't feel a thing." "Probably." Kai couldn't help the whimper that escaped from his mouth. There was nothing he could do or say to fix the situation. He had heard and seen too much, and killing him would be as easy as swatting a slow-moving fly. He was about to die again. There was no way to know if he would get another chance at life. His thoughts turned to his parents, his siblings, and even Akane, who remained warmly curled around his neck. He hadn't been able to spend much time with them, but he didn't regret it for a minute. They had brought joy to his bleak and fractured heart. "Well, I guess I have no choice but to help," came a smooth feminine voice from inside his mind. Chapter 55. The Guardian. Bewildered, Kai looked around, searching for the owner of the mysterious feminine voice. It was then he felt a warm breeze against his neck. Putting his hand to his neck, he found it devoid of his usual living fox scarf. He quickly found Akane standing between Kai and the headmistress, like a guardian from the village stories. Just as he was about to call out to her, the sight of her eyes caused his voice to catch. Her intelligent eyes had shifted from the normally perfect gold coloring to a bright red that seemed to glow and dance in the light coming off the molten lava. Then the impossible happened. Akane's body started growing, larger and larger, until she was the size of a house. One tail after another sprouted from the original, until a total of 9 majestic tails flowed behind her. The normally illustrious crimson fur had turned even more vibrant and beautiful than before. It shined and pulsed as if magic was infused and woven into every strand of fur. The very air around them rippled with power and magic. Kai had felt nothing like this before. Stone, dead bodies, and other objects began floating, as if invisible threads were pulling them into the sky. The mana in the area kept climbing. His body teetered on edge as the pressure quickly became too much for him to handle. Then the pressure stopped as everything came crashing back down to the ground. 9-tailed kitsune. 4 question marks? The once small and adorable, now turned massive and terrifying fox growled, causing the very air to vibrate so hard, houses half a block away collapsed. The stone below cracked and shattered, yet somehow Kai remained unharmed. Kai wondered if he was under an illusion again, or perhaps worse, dead. He was having trouble believing what he was seeing. The possibility that the gluttonous fox that often slept around his neck, stole his food, and made his life generally harder, was a house-sized creature of unfathomable power and magic. It was just too insane. Kai's mind spun as he tried to comprehend the situation. Had Akane always been hiding her true form from him? Did his parents know? There were just too many questions. But then it all made sense. Everything clicked. The amount of food she consumed, the legend from the village, her random appearances. His eyes widened even further at the realization that all the other foxes in the village might be the same. The headmistress, the person who had killed one of the oldest and most powerful people in the kingdom, shivered uncontrollably. Her face was fraught with horror, as if the mere sight of Akane terrified her down to her very being. Faux question marks, he heard her whisper. Here, impossible. Perhaps because it was still Akane, just in a larger form, Kai didn't feel any fear from the monster before him. You... The headmistress gulped and cleared her voice. Mighty and majestic kitsune, why have you appeared here? She tried to mask it, but the fear was evident in her voice. Oh, you know what I am. The same feminine voice entered their minds that Kai assumed was Akane. Of course, I am not bound in ignorance like those who never set their aims high, your magnificence. Magnificence, Akane purred slightly. You flatter me at the precipice of your life. The subtle threat caused the headmistress's face to turn ghastly white. You have set your sights on my food provider. The last two words were emphasized as if it was an inside joke that clearly the headmistress didn't get as her face went a shade paler. Why would I not appear when you disrespect me so? Even though the words were projected into Kai's mind, he could feel the intent and loathing laced into them, directed at the one other recipient. With no more words uttered, the headmistress vanished from sight. There was no doubt she was running for her life. You think to use illusions against me? There is no one in this myriad of worlds more proficient in them than I. Akane likewise vanished from sight, startling Kai. Then nothing. A minute passed where Kai heard nothing besides the Crodillion somewhere behind him, still stomping away. Completely out of his depth, he stood nervously waiting. Akane appeared the next moment as if walking right through space. She looked completely unharmed. Falling onto the ground in front of Kai was the headmistress laid flat on her back. Both her arms and legs were gone, burned away into stubs. She lay completely nude before them, exposed and vulnerable. You hid well with your void and illusion magic. But before you are nothing but a child wielding magic you barely comprehend. Impossible. You burned away the void, the headmistress screeched. She was still full of energy, despite her new stubby form. The fox chuckled, causing the air to vibrate visibly. Kai. Akane's voice entered his mind. Take your sword and stab her through the heart, she commanded him. Jerking his head to the side, his mouth hung open. He was stunned for a moment, but then his reason returned to him. Wow, who knew you could be grateful? He quipped before covering his mouth with his hand. His impulsivity had gotten to him again. Crimson eyes found his as Akane's tongue came out and licked the side of her mouth, hopefully teasing him. Tears began spilling down the headmistress's fear-ridden face. Knowing now that she had been the main cause of much of his trouble throughout the academy brought him no small satisfaction seeing her like this. Her designs and intentions on the kingdom had directly and indirectly killed many, including his roommate Hector. Karma was being repaid. Accepting Akane's gift, Kai's sword hovered over the woman's heart. Thrusting down with heavy blow, he stabbed right where her heart should be. His arms jerked as if his sword had hit a stone he could not cut. Only it was the woman's skin. Even with all of his strength, the blade didn't penetrate her flesh. Try again, Akane calmly sent him. Don't do this. My master will kill you both, she cried out. Kai turned his head to look at the fox standing right above him. No one will know of your death. I set up illusions in the area before you even found us. You have been trapped in my domain this entire time, and you never knew. None shall ever know of your death. Akane's voice was the visage of confidence. Pushing down with renewed strength, he still couldn't make any progress. Keep trying, came Akane's voice again. A large clawed toe moved in front of Kai's face a moment later and pressed down on the pommel of his sword. The woman screamed holy murder as the sword sunk in. Even with a sword, though the heart she didn't seem to be dying. Organs were less useful the higher you ascended, meaning even without a heart, the headmistress might be able to live on. Crimson's flames engulfed the headmistress a moment later. Kai felt no heat from the fire as the woman screeched in pain only to vanish into ashes a moment later. Your group has slain Human Overlord level 37. Vanguard has reached Forging level 9. Vanguard has reached Forging level 14, only 5 levels. Obviously, his contributions didn't amount to much. With the traitor gone, Akane turned her full attention onto Kai. Behind them, the stomping of the Credillion hadn't stopped. He was surprised the Credillion hadn't noticed the massive fox, but then he remembered Akane had said she set the area up in an illusion. The two stared at each other. During that time, Kai realized Akane had not taken a single breath. Is that all I am to you? A food provider? Kai started off with a joke, which fell lamely on his ears. If the mythical, legendary monster said he was a food provider, who was he to say anything differently? The massive fox lowered her head until she was at ground level with Kai. Her crimson eyes sparkled with humor as she stared right at him. Strangely, he didn't feel afraid in front of this monster. Perhaps because of everything they had been, though, he trusted her. After all, she had just saved him and helped him to level up. And most importantly, he had fed her often. I'm not tasty, he added. That seemed to get a reaction as the sides of her mouth curled up. Her eyes lifted to view something above his head and beyond. Matching her gaze, he saw the Crodelian was now staring intently at Akane. The illusions must have vanished. Follow. Akane walked past Kai in the direction of the Crodelian. Stepping onto the lava, it receded from Akane as if her mere touch was poison to it. Every step cleared a new spot of lava until a pathway had formed. Oddly, the lava did not flow back after Akane had walked past. Shaking his head at the sight, he followed in a sprint, or else he wouldn't be able to catch up. Stopping half a block away, the Crodelian towered over Akane's new form. It made no move to do anything, as if it was weary of her. All it did was stare unnervingly at her. No visible humans remained fighting the monster. Either they had all given up or died. The Crodelian looked relatively unharmed, despite having fought hundreds of warriors and mages through the city. Kai's fate was now in Akane's paws. Rather, it always seemed to be. He just hadn't known it until now. Closer to the Crodelian than ever, an oppressive stench of rotten eggs permeated the air. It was one thing to face monsters on or near your level, but standing before something so much more powerful. He had to actively fight his instincts to run. It was what he imagined standing before a dragon, a creature of supreme power that's very presence messed with his instincts. Only Akane's confident presences kept him from pissing himself and running. It didn't even seem to acknowledge him below at the fox's feet. If they fought, he would definitely die as mere collateral, as would most everyone else remaining in the city. Use your gravity on it, Akane spoke to his mind, breaking his turbulent thoughts. Would his gravity even have any effect on such a thing? Sure, it was enormous with a lot of mass, but it was also incredibly powerful. The theory of experience states that experience from defeating a monster is split proportionally to the damage proportionally dealt to it. In Kai's current situation, most of the people that had damaged the Crodelian had died, so there would be less of a split. But still, his gravity would probably be too weak to cause any harm to that monster. Domain was out. He could only use it within 15 meters of his person. That left Gravity Pillar and Gravity Well. An unexpected air-vibrating growl brought him out of his stupor. Right, just use the abilities already. Gravity Well and Gravity Pillar were placed next and over the Crodelian. The only reason he knew the monster felt it was because the next second its eyes shifted to him before it dismissed him as inconsequential and turned back to the real threat. Roaring its challenge, the Crodelian's eyes never left Akane's body again. There was no change in Akane's body language. She appeared casual, as if entire situation wasn't a concern. If she was communicating with the monster, Kai wasn't aware. Lava began flowing around the Crodelian's entire body. In between every scale, lava emerged, giving the black scales a highlighted effect. At the same time, the temperature in the area spiked. The entire area below the Crodelian's feet had turned to bubbling lava that kept expanding outward. Even half a block from the monster, Kai felt his skin sizzle and begin to cook. His armor was shining even brighter than when it had been engulfed in flames during the battle with Max. He thought he was about to die until a barrier surrounded him, completely blocking the rising heat. The lava expanded until it reached the two, but instead of swallowing them whole, it shirked around, making an island of sorts. The sea of lava surrounded them until it fully encompassed the area. Taking a step forward, the Crocodilian's foot splashed lava high into the air. Its body angled down, mouth unhinging. Kai thought death would soon be upon him again when he saw the eerie orange glow from inside its mouth. What followed wasn't chunks of lava, but a concentrated stream shot straight at Akane. "This for destroying my favorite food stall," the words entered his mind as crimson fire flowed out of Akane's mouth. Kai felt himself go blind as lava and fire collided. Emilio lay broken and bleeding as his body had been thrown into a partially collapsed clothing store. His arm up to his elbow was gone, destroyed by the Crocodilian, and with it his ring of storage. 3/4 of his body was burned or melted, including his right lung. After so much fighting over the years, he could tell his exact injuries with ease. His only hope was that a healer or someone with powerful potions could find him, or his end would be very near. 1,300 years he had lived, and for 1,000 of that he had ruled, creating a kingdom to call home. Now his life's work was at a precipice. A small breeze could knock them off the edge, or in this case, the Crocodilian. If the beast continued its rampage through the kingdom, then it would be the end. Not even the Heart Empire could do so much damage. Shifting his body, he pushed off the floor with one hand. What should have been the simplest of tasks in his realm was grueling torture. Finally standing, he leaned against a half-broken wall before bending over and throwing up more blood than he was comfortable seeing. A hole must have burned into my stomach, causing blood to flow into it. Wiping his mouth on his dirty sleeve, he took one step, then another, until he found himself at the entrance of the shop. So many buildings had been destroyed, allowing him an almost clear line of sight to the Crocodilian nearly 20 blocks away. Not that it didn't completely tower over everything around it. His enhanced eyes examined the monster, but his heart broke as he saw most of the damage had healed already. It had all been too superficial. His brows shot up when he saw another monster standing below the enormous monster. A crimson fox with 9 tails that didn't even reach kneecap height of the Crocodilian. Identifying it, he received a huge shock. Forest Fox, Foundation Level 60. His mind was playing tricks on him. He had been thinking of the royal palace's food theft, and the suspect had been his son's friend companion Fox. Now he was hallucinating, as his mind injected the identified tag of the boy's fox onto the creature before him. Reaching his remaining hand up to rub his eye, he felt nothing where it should have been. Switching it over to the other side, he felt relieved at feeling the other one. Bird, Foundation Level 0. What? His head shook away the impossibility. Next to the fox, he saw a boy. Human, Forging Level 14. Relief flowed through his shattered body. That makes more sense. Wait, no it doesn't. Why is someone in the forging realm next to both? His thoughts were frozen as lava and fire collided in the air. The reaction from the ensuing collision instantly obliterated any buildings nearby the fight. From even 20 blocks away, he felt the temperature rise insanely fast. The oppressive heat distorted the air, causing his remaining lung to feel like his charred skin. A barrier spawned around him, blocking the heat, but he didn't dare look around for who did it, else he missed the fight. Like a wave of destruction, building after building began melting and vanishing, until 10 seconds later, the doorway of the very building in which he had been standing began melting. He was safe inside the barrier. It didn't even fluctuate or pulse with damage, as if the heat could do nothing to it. In the next moment, the Crocodilian dissolved much like the buildings around him. Emilio didn't know how many times he could be shocked today until he became numb to it, but what he saw terrified him. A monster that had lived in fire and lava, that was surmised to be highly resistant to fire magic, was literally being melted away in mere seconds by fire magic. The stream of crimson fire traveled down the Crocodilian's body, melting its scales and bones until nothing was left. The ding came when the head had vanished. The fox didn't relent as the crimson flames finished off the entire body until no traces of the Crocodilian could be found. Your group has slain Crocodilian, Paragon Level 2. A smile came to his face. His head dipped, followed by his body as he collapsed to the ground. Laying on his side, the world turned darker. He wasn't sure if it was because the fire and lava had vanished or because he was at his end. Thoughts of his family swept through his mind, and then the kingdom. He only hoped that in his absence someone would protect his legacy. His world turned darker until no light reached his eyes. At the very abyss of death, he heard 4 words. Let's make a deal. Chapter 56, A Choice. Your group has slain Credillion, Paragon Level 2. Vanguard has reached Forging Level 15. Vanguard has reached Forging Level 24. By the time Kai's vision returned to him, the Credillion was gone. Judging by the horrific roar a few moments ago, it hadn't been a peacefully passing. Sitting on the floor, Akani puffed up her furry chest like a child seeking approval. Kai gave her a brief glance before staring all around. A few thousand shields were erected around survivors of Akan's battle with the Credillion. All that remained inside the partially destroyed walls were the ruins of buildings on the distant side of the city. It was practically a wasteland. His first thought was that were too few shields inside the city. There had only been a total of 15 minutes from the time the alarms rang until the time the Credillion had begun rampaging throughout the city. There was no way everyone had been able to escape safely. It was likely tens of thousands had died, but between Akani's fire and the Credillion's lava, nothing remained of the corpses, not even ashes. Kai turned his furious gaze on the fox. Akane, why didn't you save everyone? With your power, you could have stopped and killed the monster long before it ever reached the city. He commanded an answer. He knew his anger was clouding his judgment because he was yelling at someone akin to a demigod, but he couldn't help himself. She waited a few moments to respond. I could have, but why would I? These people mean nothing to me. I am under no obligation to save them. I only prevented the ones remaining from dying by my own attack. But it was so unnecessary. So many innocent people died that didn't have to. People that you may have interacted with, that cooked and fed you, Kai seethed. You're right, the loss of tens of thousands is indeed a tragedy. But someday, someone might rise from the ashes of this capital. Someone that may not have strived for the pinnacle of magic before. That person may one day save millions at the cost of tens of thousands. You talk as if that is a sure thing. It isn't. All that may happen is the collapse of this kingdom now that half of its defenders are dead. If that is what fate decrees, then that is what will happen. You are young to the myriad of worlds. But one day you will realize to never rely on others. In the end, your life is in your hand. Kai stopped arguing. It was pointless. Akane was likely older than any human that was alive today. She would have without a doubt seen more during her time than him. He wouldn't be able to change her mind right now. Around them, the shields covering the survivors had vanished. Kai assumed Akane had been the one to save them. What kind of magical power must she have to both shield every survivor in the city and kill the Credillion at the same time? It was beyond his comprehension. Kai wondered if the survivors could see them right now, or if Akane had wrapped the area in an illusion. Shrinking back to her previous size, she padded up to Kai. Don't take too long. I'm hungry, she said as she jumped into his arms the next moment. If he was being honest with himself, it was a comfort having Akane in his arms once again. Now that he knew her true form and strength, there was even more comfort to be had as she snuggled in. What now? Kai asked his massive companion. Now you need to settle your affairs here and say your goodbyes. We will be returning home shortly. Ka turned his gaze around. The academy was gone, along with the palace. They had been destroyed and melted in the brief fight. He had no idea what the future held now. All of his plans had been liquefied. The first thing he had to do was find his friends. Nicholas should have been safe after being flown away by one of the royal guards. Hector was an unknown. Kai had no idea if he had managed to escape the city. Where are my friends? He asked. Both are by the western exit. Kai started walking towards the city's western exit. Was any of my family inside the city when this happened? Just Garen. He is fine if that is what you were going to ask next, she said, predicting his next question. Also, we have an established mind link. It would be more discreet if you can communicate telepathically with me. especially as we approach the survivors. So we could have talked this entire year. Kai tried thinking what he was going to say, only there was no response. Trying again, he directed his thoughts at Akane this time. We could have, but I would have missed out on so much fun. Somehow, she sent over pure emotions of laughing to him. Kai couldn't help but chuckle himself. After all the shenanigans he had dealt with during the year, Akane probably had a good time listening to him talk to her even when he didn't expect an answer. Hundreds of people were coming back into the near-empty city again. Likely it had spread around that the monster had been defeated and it was once again safe to enter. What would befall this kingdom now that most of its high-realm individuals had been killed? Kai followed Akane's directions until he found himself face-to-face with his friends. Swarmed by hugs, both Andre and Nicholas were ecstatic to see him. "You're alive. Where were you? We've been trying to find you." Kai was bombarded with questions before he had a chance to breathe. "I was inside the walls, hunkering down. I couldn't manage to escape," Kai told a half-lie. He really hadn't been able to escape between the Credillion and the headmistress, both impeding his way. Mentioning the fact that he had been inside the walls until just now, he was barraged with new questions. People around them had begun paying attention when he had said such things. "I'm sorry, I didn't see what happened. All I remember is heat, and I think I passed out." Kai lied effortlessly. "Akane, did the survivors see you?" "Only those who could pierce my illusions were able. So it's possible that rumors of a nine-tailed fox might be going around. I better make myself scarce before someone connects those rumors to a certain fox hanging around my neck. Guys, I have to leave soon and return home. I wanted you both to know that before I vanished." This had obviously shocked them as both pairs of eyes focused on Kai. "I didn't tell either of you, but there was a good chance I wasn't going to be attending the second year at the academy here. I might be attending Prime Academy. Assuming my father accepts being a finalist in an uncompleted tournament as valid to our deal. I'm sorry if it seems like I'm ditching you guys after such a disaster, but I was told I was going home soon." "What does this mean for us?" Kai took a moment before answering. "We will always be friends. I just don't know what my plans are for the immediate future. If I am staying in the kingdom or moving on, I will only know after I talk to my family. Depending on the choices made, you may see me sooner rather than later." "Well, you know where to find us," Nicholas responded with misty eyes. There was a solemnness to not knowing if you were ever going to see someone you were close with again. Even though he had only known them for 10 months, they had become great friends to him. Something he wasn't sure if he could ever have again. "Akane, did any of Nicholas's family survive?" She responded with an affirmative. Nearly half of his siblings had passed away, including his third brother. The king had also apparently survived and was already leading the others to salvage the situation. Kai lied, saying he had seen Nicholas's father, still alive and already organizing relief efforts inside the walls before he exited. They spent the next 5 minutes talking before Akane nudged his mind with a reminder. He didn't know why she was in such a rush, but he didn't argue. Saying his goodbyes, he started walking around the walls to the southern road. He was no longer afraid of bandits or wayward adventurers, with Akane guarding him. He wished he had known of her prowess beforehand. He could have ventured out into the wild and trained and leveled faster. After traveling for a few hours, Akane announced that he was going to ride her. Transforming into a massive fox again, she lowered herself and allowed Kai to climb onto her back. Somehow the fur felt like both solid metal and the softest illustrious material he had ever felt. Gripping on for dear life, Akane began running off the main path. "Why didn't we do this earlier?" "There were too many people around. My illusions are not invincible, as there are many ways to break through them, and it wasn't worth the risk." The wind stung as it blew into Kai's face. He was forced to squint as they traveled in his attempts to keep them open. The background passed by so quickly that he wasn't able to see anything with any clarity. In a matter of minutes, they had already entered the mists of the illusionary misty region. A 3-day trip by caravan had turned into 15 minutes. Akane didn't bother taking the main path the humans used in and out of the illusionary misty region. 30 seconds later, they stopped in an area that he had never been to before. The mists covered the area but didn't penetrate the invisible dome blocking it. It was the same as the village where the mist surrounded but never entered, but this obviously wasn't the village. It wasn't actually completely shrouded by the mists. Above him, the mists were lacking as if a hole had been blown through them. Despite being daytime, Kai could see a few other planets that were completely visible to his eyes. It had been especially cloudy before they had entered the illusionary misty region, but the hole above him showed no clouds. Despite seeing the bright sky above them, the sun didn't reach them. "What is this place?" he asked aloud. Stone pillars were erected in a massive flat circle. The circumference was larger than even the Colosseum. The ground was entirely made of stone and rock, with depictions carved into them. Akane remained silent as she stepped onto the ground, causing the illustrations to begin glowing crimson. Drawing of kitsune dominated the area. Most of the illustrations showed different kitsune doing all kinds of activities, but most of the images portrayed hunting or battles. There were battles against monsters he didn't recognize, and some about whom he could guess but had never seen in person. There weren't any weak boars in these images, only monsters of power that might pose challenges. A large area had been dedicated to designs of the kitsunes fighting dragons. He only knew that they were dragons because they fit the description his mother had told him about to the exact detail. It showed many dragons and kitsune battling in a massive battle or perhaps even a war. It showed hundreds of kitsune and dragons falling in battle. Runes he could not read were written over many of the kitsunes in the battle. Perhaps names of the fallen. There was no order to the pictures that Kai could see. But at the center of the circle of illustrations was a picture that he could only guess was the first one. It was the simplest of all the images, showing a single nine-tailed kitsune and nothing else. "My mother," Akane's voice answered his thoughts. "This mural depicts the history of the kitsune clan." "Who exactly are you, Akane?" "My name is Andromeda." The mere mention of her name caused Kai's head pain that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "You have known me as the matriarch of the Kitsune clan, but I don't think you've truly understood the ramifications of that until now." "Andromeda? Then where did Akane come from?" "Your ancestor, the one I originally made the pact with regarding the village, named me Akane. Apparently, it meant crimson from his homeland. It was meant to be a disguise that wouldn't draw attention to those who know my name." "Andromeda? It's a nice name," Kai repeated it. "Never say my name aloud. You do not want the attention that it may bring." Akane's voice projected seriousness. Kai tore his gaze away from the mural. "Tell me, why did you show me all this?" Kai wasn't stupid enough to believe this wasn't shown to him without a good reason. "I've brought you here so you can make a choice." Chapter 57. The Future. "A choice?" Kai questioned. Spinning his head around, he felt multiple strong presences nearby. Even without a sensory ability, there was a blaring change in the atmosphere around him, like the air got tighter and was trying to squeeze him. From inside the mists, a dozen kitsune crossed the boundary onto the mural floor. The sight was awe-inspiring. They were all in their true forms and easily towered over him as they approached. Despite their new forms and 9 tails, Kai could identify each of them by the patterns and color of their fur. Even though Akane was considered their matriarch, she was the smallest of those present, but something told Kai she was the strongest among them. Sigma, Ursa, Canis, Proxima, Vela. Kai started naming the kitsune strolling toward them. It was intimidating, but read no malice on their fox faces, only humor and intrigue. "So the little pup has grown." A masculine voice entered his mind. Kai looked around trying to figure out the owner of the voice, but none gave any motion that it had come from them. They surrounded him and Andromeda in a loose circle. "Nine-tailed kitsune, Sainan. Nine-tailed kitsune. Nine-tailed kitsune. Nine-tailed kitsune. Nine-tailed kitsune." Only Sigma was 4 question marks, the same as Akane. "I guess it's Andromeda now. Going to take some time to get used to it." "So what is this about? I already told Andromeda that I'm not tasty," Kai jested. Throaty chuckles vibrated the air from multiple sources, but unlike the capital's cobbled stone flooring, the muraled stone below didn't even crack or shake. "Very few in the village come to know of our true nature. Only those we deem worthy or like you, who find out in extreme circumstances, know of our existence." Kai simmered at the slight, but he knew he was truly nothing in their eyes. Only a forging realm brat. One of millions, perhaps billions. "Normally we wouldn't have revealed ourselves to you until your ascension to the 5th realm at minimum. It is only because the matriarch favors you that we appear before you now." Kai had enough of getting ragged on. "All right, so tell me, what is this choice that Andromeda mentioned?" "A moment more, little pup. We will have additional guests joining us before we discuss your options," Akani said in a teasing tone. Through the mists emerged 3 human silhouettes that Kai immediately recognized as his family. His father, mother, and grandfather had apparently come to join the super-secret meeting. His mother ran to him the second he was in sight, completely unfazed by the gathering of giant 9-tailed kitsune. His father and grandfather merely shook their heads as they watched Kai being swept up in a hug. "My adorable son," his mother squeezed hard. "I'm so proud of you." "Making it to the finals," she squeezed harder. "Mom," Kai choked out, hugging her back. He thought they would be less sentimental, but his father and grandfather both hugged him tightly as well. It was a little awkward since he was still in his alderlight armor. "I'm so proud of you, son," his father said. "You guys know about all of this?" Kai asked the obvious question. "Of course, we are descendants of the village founder after all. Your father is head of the guard, and his marriage to me also makes him in the know." His mother air quoted the last word. Kai absently nodded. While Kai had lived 2 lives, this was still a lot to take in. The destruction of the city had only occurred a few hours ago. Now he had to wrap his head around his family being tenants. He didn't really know what they were considered. They lived in a village filled with near-godlike monsters. The silly village tale had turned out to be real. This was a lot to take in, even after a second life. "Okay," Kai drawled. "Not that I'm not happy to see you guys or anything, but I'm honestly burning with curiosity about why I am here." "It's nothing bad, son," his father said, picking up on Kai's tension. "We want to discuss your future, specifically your immediate future." "Right," Kai drawled again. "I thought the plan was to attend the Prime Academies if I won first place in the tournament. I know I didn't exactly win, but that was We know you did wonderful, Kai, and certainly you qualify for our deal if that is what you still desire. Just listen to Andromeda for a minute. Life is certainly about choices, one single choice after another, all leading to the present time. Most choices are of non-significant value, and sometimes they could lead to tragedy. And boons on occasion," Andromeda started. He gave her a stare as to get on with it. "There is a point to all this monologuing," Andromeda claimed. She projected seriousness, causing Kai to focus. "By the gods, the young are impatient. Because you have 2 very caring parents, they are willing to provide you with options such as attending the Prime Academies, but there are other alternatives. For instance, you could join the Adventurers Guild immediately or do anything else, really. Whatever your heart desires. But if you choose to attend the Prime Academy, I have a favor to ask of you." Andromeda's eyes glowed crimson for a moment, more than usual. Another presence joined them as it entered through the mists. All of the kitsune and humans turned to watch the newcomer. It was another kitsune, but it appeared as a fox. Crimson fur covered most of the body. Each foot had black fur, appearing as if she was wearing boots. Even though Akani was one of the smallest foxes in the village, this one was even smaller, about a third of the size. The little fox looked absolutely adorable. Kitsune, Foundation Level 65. It had a different identify tag than Akani's fox and true form. Did that mean it was a different species, or was there something else going on? The little fox looked cowed and nervous, more so than Kai, despite being surrounded by those of what he assumed were her own kind. "Kai, meet Asteria." "Asteria, meet Kai," Andromeda introduced them. "Asteria is my daughter." A huge bomb was dropped on Kai's head. "What? When?" "I had her a few months prior to you leaving the academy. You noticed my absence, if I remember. She has been hidden away until now. Asteria, say hello." Andromeda gently nudged the tiny fox over. Asteria was the first to initiate contact. A moment later he heard a timid, feminine, childlike voice speak inside his mind. "Hello?" Hi, Kai responded. There was an awkward silence between the group. Everyone had been watching their lackluster interaction. Breaking the silence, Kai asked, "Shouldn't she be in a higher realm or stronger?" Andromeda shook her massive head. "Many races of monsters will give birth to strong children, including dragons." She hissed that last part out. "Kitsune must grow from the beginning like you humans. They gain one tail for every realm they ascend until the 9th. Kai saw that every kitsune here had 9 tails, meaning they were all in the Paragon realm at minimum. Sigma and Akani at the very least were probably higher. They were all existences that could single-handedly topple an empire. Only 1 year old, Asteria here is very special. She is the first kitsune born since the Great War. Kai did a double-take between Asteria and Andromeda. Wait, the Great War ended 2139 years ago. There hasn't been one born since. By the 9, how old are these kitsune? No, Akane growled. The other kitsune also growled in response to his question. There was a clash in the air as each kitsune growling caused a disturbance in the mana and the air. Barriers spawned around each human and the small fox. Apparently, it was a touchy subject. Kai held his hands up. Deciding to get back on the subject, he asked, "What does this have to do with me? If you intend to travel off-planet to the Prime Academies, then I would ask that you take Asteria with you as a companion. Together you would train and ascend. Having a companion would slow your personal progress more than if you were to fight alone, but at least you would have someone to rely on." His parents and grandfather said nothing and had no reaction. Likely they had all discussed this before, meaning Kai was the only one finding out about this. "I'm not sure I understand. Why can't you come with me or us? I thought we were a team." "As much as I want to, child, I cannot." "How can anyone stop you?" Kai was very confused. This was not how he saw his day going, and now he was finding out he was going to have to part from a companion that he had grown very fond of. "I know you won't be satisfied without an explanation, so I will give you a brief one. We of the Kitsune clan are exiled. We cannot leave this world. In time you will learn about the 6th Great War, a war so massive in scale that it encompassed all of the planets in the myriad of worlds. The sentient humanoids weren't the only ones affected during this time, even the monsters of the worlds fought. There was so much death and chaos. The estimated number of lives lost during those 42 years of war is incalculable. There were scuffles between the kitsunes and the dragons that eventually led to the two sides fiercely fighting against each other, with no less than the extermination of the other. Hundreds of dragons fell, but so did many kitsune. Fierce bloodlust leaked from every single one of the kitsunes present except for Asteria. Kai felt himself choking. His muscles froze, even his brain felt like it had shrunk so much that it was non-functional. Pain flared in his chest. He wasn't sure if his heart was still beating. He had felt bloodlust before, but never like this. Through his eyes, he could see that even his parents weren't unaffected as they gritted their teeth. "Enough!" his mother screamed a few seconds later. The bloodlust subsided. The kitsune turned away, perhaps embarrassed for their outburst. "I will spare you the details, but we lost the war. The remaining kitsune were spared and exiled from our ancestral home on Titan Prime. We have made this planet our new domain. But if any of us were to step a foot off, they would come for us to finish the battle." Kai's mind processed everything. "Wait though, wouldn't they come for you if Asteria travels to Titan Prime with me?" Kai asked the obvious question. "No, the pact only applies to those who were alive when the battle ended. Asteria may travel freely with you, though you should still take precaution should you wish her to join you." "Why me? I don't understand why you can't help Asteria level up, or even you know me." He gave her a winning smile. From the side, his parents laughed. "I certainly could help both of you to level, but then while your level may raise, your personal growth will wither. Progress without challenge would cause you to become deficient. What if one day, after I assist you in leveling up, and you find yourself against a powerful foe, and I am not there? Without experience and adversity, how can you improve and become your best selves? I helped you with a few levels because of the convenience of it, but that will never happen again. I would be holding you back from your true potential if I was there to save you at every fight or did most of the work for you. You must earn it. But I think you know that deep down, Andromeda rumbled. Kai gripped his hair. This entire conversation was stressful. What if we die? It was one thing if Kai died in battle, but now he felt fearful about letting down the kitsune. If the worst happened, and the first kitsune in over 2,000 years to be born died while under his care, he would never forgive himself. Then that is simply fate. But Kai, of all the people in the village, I chose you. I purposefully joined you during the last year to judge and observe you. I have found you capable and worthy of protecting and raising my daughter. Kai's breathing became heavy. It was a lot of responsibility and trust to place on someone in the forging realm. Did she not see him struggle throughout the year? She must have, which meant she still trusted him with something so precious. It was too much. I will ask one more time, Kai. Will you let Asteria join you on your journey? Kai didn't know how to respond. It was an incredible offer to have a monster with such potential join him. When he looked down into the inquisitive face of Asteria, he knew his answer. Yes, Kai choked out. He nodded his head as well. I do want to go to Titan Prime, and I will be happy to let Asteria join. I will protect her. Protect, but do not coddle. The group returned to the village, or more specifically, they teleported there nearby. It was his first time teleporting. It was a surreal experience to see the land before your eyes change in a split second. It was also very nauseating. All the foxes were back into their smaller forms, the villagers none the wiser. Entering the village through the western gate, Kai immediately noticed a change. Dark and black fur-covered foxes were roaming around, some traveling from shadow to shadow. Shadow Fox, Foundation Level 93. From the forest? Yes, Proxima saved them before the forest was purged. They had integrated into the village well. Already some had partnered up with a few villagers. There weren't as many shadow foxes compared to the kitsune. They were quite easy to domesticate. While their wild tendencies exist, they do not try to harm anyone. We leave tomorrow at sunrise. Say your goodbyes to your family before then. Akane padded away abruptly. Kai watched her with a longing gaze. I guess that means you too. He shook his head and caught up to his parents down the road. The next morning he was saying goodbye once again to his mother and siblings. Garen was missing in action as usual. Holding on to him as if her life depended on it, Ariel had her arms wrapped around his neck and her legs around his waist as she was attached to him on his side. No, Ariel howled. I won't let you leave. Pulling her off finger by finger, he placed his hands on her shoulders and kneeled on one knee. Ariel, this is important. It's somewhere I've always wanted to go. Please be happy for me. She looked like she was struggling not to cry. I have a request. Akane will be staying behind. She is going to be lonely too. Will you keep her company and watch her for me? Please? His request seemed to reach her, as the next moment she nodded ever so slightly. Jacob. Kai. The two brothers hugged. If things don't work out, you can always return home. Or even if you want to visit, we will be waiting, his mother choked out, tears spilling down her face. Kai felt his stomach squeeze, seeing his family upset. It was a tough decision, but he needed this. Venturing out into the mists, Kai, Andromeda, Asteria, and his father teleported with Akane's powers. Through his closed eyelids, he could feel the sun brightly shining. As if that stark difference wasn't enough to tell him he was no longer in the Ashbourne kingdom, the air pressure and humidity had changed. The air was dry and about 20 degrees colder than his tropical volcanic kingdom. Even the ground had a different feel. Opening his eyes, he was amazed by how crystal clear the light blue sky was. To his right, the sun was just beginning to rise, even though it had only been right after dinner time when he left. Just how far had they traveled in a matter of seconds? On the opposite side of him was a city contained by massive white walls. Kai would have thought those walls impenetrable just a day before, but now he knew the truth that monsters lurked out there that could easily wipe out kingdoms despite all the gains made by humans. The walls before him didn't even look as tall or sturdy as Verdia, the capital of the Ashbourne kingdom. Unlike the Ashbourne kingdom, there was a gentle calm in the air here. The city of Alexandria, Akane informed. the only city on this planet with a world teleporter capable of taking you to Titan Prime or others. Akane was already in her smaller form, snaking her way around Kai's neck. Taking a deep breath, he took in her scent and feel, knowing it might be many years before he saw her again. In his arms, Asteria was napping already. Entering the city was easy, and it was a straight shot to the center of the city where the teleporter was located. Kai followed his father. Together they bought 2 tickets to Titan Prime, one for Kai and the other for Asteria. Before I forget, hold out your hand, Akane said. Doing what he was told, he held his hand out palm up. 1 second his palm was empty, the next it was holding a plain metal ring. A ring of storage, 1.5 cubic meters of storage, filled to the brim with food and other items. You got me a ring? Not to be ungrateful, but we really could have used one earlier this year. I know, I was using it. It was a gift from Alex. He left it with me when you became distracted by your friend. What the fuck? And only now you give it to me? Kai gave her a fierce glare that he knew did nothing to her. When the time came, an announcement the world teleporter was shifting to send the next group to Titan Prime. The next trip to Titan Prime wouldn't be for 6 days. Apparently there was a strict schedule they had to keep. Miss the transport and you would have to wait or find alternative means. Son, you have everything you need in your ring. When you get to the academy, find a teacher named Niles. He is your sponsor. He will help you. Good luck. His father gripped his shoulder. His eyes were filled with concern for his son. Kai would be traveling so far away that no one would be able to reach or save him. Handing over 2 glyph tickets, Kai walked onto the platform with Asteria still in his hands. She was awake and her attention was on Akane. If they were communicating, he wasn't privy to it. Finally, Akane's voice flowed into his mind. Kai, no one must find out about Asteria being a kitsune. Illusions are inherent for us kitsunes. She can mask her identifying tag from almost anyone, even in the Foundation realm. The only time she can become exposed is when she would have to use her full powers, transforming and causing however many tails she has at the time to emerge. It would become very dangerous for you if word got around. She would be coveted and hunted, and if you are on Titan Prime, I would not be able to help you. Kai acknowledged. He would do his best to be careful. And Kai, that doesn't mean I won't help or train you, but as you are now, you're too weak. Come back after you have attained at least the 5th realm. From the platform, he could still see his father and Akane, who was balancing on his shoulder. Waving to them, he felt a change in the mana around him as the world began to shift. Good luck, Ben. Chapter 58, A Blast of the Past. Benny boy, wait up. Despite the request, Ben continued at the same pace, making sure not to react. The sound of heavy footsteps followed behind him. Come on, don't be upset. I'm only a little late. Though he couldn't see his friend's face, he could detect the obvious smirk of satisfaction in his voice. Ben kept up his silent protest as he walked down the busy street. People quickly shifted out of his way. Either he was projecting an aura of irritation, or his notoriety was coming into play as everyone gawked and stared. Passing by the final gate of the city, the guards saluted him and his companion, who continued to silently follow behind. Once they were a few hundred meters beyond the gate, Ben decided to break the silence. Why were you late? Late? His friend asked, puzzled. Oh, it was nothing, just a bit tired, he answered without the usual enthusiasm. Turning, he stared into the green eyes of his best friend. Lucien, where were you this morning? His voice held an edge of accusation to it. Lucien shifted his eyes for a second, but that was enough to know he wanted to avoid the question. What's the big deal? I am only an hour late. 2. Lucien just shrugged. These things happen. I went looking for you. Nobody had seen you all night, even your usual nightly haunts, Ben accused. Ah, I was with a new girl. Where and who? What the hell is going on? Why are you getting on my case? Lucien's tone turned defensive. I searched for you for 2 hours. I couldn't find you anywhere in the city. No blood signature anywhere. Not a soul knew of your location. The guards never saw you leave. Ben couldn't help but let out a concerned tone equal to the panic and hurt he had felt inside. He knew it was irrational to get upset at his friend. Lucian didn't yet know of the news they had received at the morning call. What the fuck does it matter? So I was a little late. I don't understand why you are getting so worked up. It's not like you've never been late before. Ben took a step, getting in Lucian's face. His blood boiled. If your ass had been at roll call, you would have known that 2 teams didn't check in last night. Both were patrolling the jungle mire. 8 squads, including us, were ordered to find them with haste, Ben reiterated. And in case you weren't aware, it was Squad Torch and Ore and Squad Echo 9. Lucian's mouth rounded in an O shape as it dawned on him. Danielle is missing? His voice filled with worry. Ben nodded. I thought you might have been missing with them. The possibility of losing his best friend frightened him, though he wouldn't admit it aloud. It was a given that their lives would be in danger every time they left the sanctuary of their city and its walls. Fuck. Lucian ran a hand down his hair. Turning his body, Ben could see he was gripping his black hair tightly. Fuck, 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 Lucian repeated. Not needing to say any more, Ben took a dagger from his belt and drew it across his palm. Crimson blood pooled immediately. With a mere thought, the blood crawled down his arm and to his back, where it began forming into a pair of wings. The cut remained open, but no blood no longer spilled from it. Flexing his hand, only a minor pain remained. Just a nuisance he was used to by now. Ready? Ben asked. 1 second, Lucian said, as he tugged down his monster-hide chest armor that had appeared from nowhere. Ben knew that upon entering the 4th realm, Lucian had unlocked a skill that allowed him to store items inside an independent space inside his body. All of the other soldiers and merchants envied that ability, though he claimed he wasn't able to keep store much inside it for now, since the skill was only at level 1. The 2 took flight, with Ben's wings quickly propelling him up and over the trees. Lucian followed. His space manipulation was much less flashy than a pair of red wings comprised of liquid blood. Flying side by side, the 2 kept their eyes peeled for any potential predators over the next hour. After an hour of flying, they came upon a massive cliff. On top of the cliff was a line of trees indicating the beginning of the jungle mere. The mass of trees continued for an unknown amount of distance. It went well past what Ben's enhanced eyes could see. He knew there were entrances into the jungle short of scaling the cliff or flying that he couldn't see, but they were far away from where the missing groups should have been. Nearly half as thick as a building, each tree was massive in scale and size. It was a jungle with up to a dozen layers of ecosystems, depending on where you traveled through. Each easily towered over any building inside the city of New Hope, though Lucian claimed they paled in comparison to the buildings of old Earth where his friend had lived prior before his parents took refuge in this myriad of worlds. The 2 eventually stopped right outside the jungle. Ben's wings of blood flapped, keeping him afloat, while Lucian stood stiff as he looked down into the jungle from the air. He neither hovered nor swayed in the air. A frown formed on both of their faces as they stared at the vast jungle. Both knew they were more likely not to find their missing friends than they were to find them. It would be like finding a specific pebble thrown into a lake. We can't search by air, Ben stated. No, we can't, Lucian agreed with a grimace. Ben's blood signature skill could detect life comprised of blood within 30 meters, but the trees towered well over his max range. Unfortunately, Lucian's skills were even worse than his when it came to searching for life. Their only option, the less desirable one, which would be to search while traveling on the ground level. Landing on top of the cliff, mere feet from where the line of trees began, Ben's blood wings reformed, shifting into armor that covered his body. He kept a dagger in hand in case he needed more blood quickly. Focusing on his blood signature skill, he concentrated. He groaned aloud at what he sensed. His blood signature skill was pinging dozens of life forms all in close proximity to them. Most were tiny and inconsequential, but some were larger. He was thankful that human blood was vastly different from monster blood, at least according to his blood signature ability. His ability had never failed him, at least for those comprised of blood within 30 meters of himself. Stepping inside the jungle, there was a drastic change as day turned to evening. The sun barely penetrated down to the ground floor, even at the edge of the jungle, making it very difficult and dangerous to travel through. The two traveled deep into the jungle, with Lucian taking the lead as he hacked and slashed at brushes and vines. Any light from the sun had completely vanished over the last hour, causing their eyes to become accustomed to the darkness. Even without the lack of light, Ben was able to make out things a few meters ahead. The journey was slow going. Both made effort to minimize noise, causing them to move slower than they wanted. Neither spoke out of fear of drawing monsters towards their position. Any attacks would impede and slow their progress. Ben felt his skin crawl as they traveled through the eerie dark jungle. Lucian had the fortune of not being able to sense the many monsters nearby as they passed, some only a few meters away. Some shifting about, but most remained unmoving and asleep. The worst was those that followed the two and watched from afar but did not attack. It wasn't just the monsters on the ground that gave them pause, but they often passed underneath many in the different layers of the jungle above. Ben couldn't relax knowing there were so many monsters lurking just beyond their sight. Sensing they were about to run into another monster in 20 meters, Ben caused one of the drops of blood he placed on top of Lucian's hand to heat up, signaling his friend to shift his direction to the left. Both were seasoned enough fighters to not overly rely on Ben's blood signature as a warning system to ambushes. The possibility remained that they could encounter an enemy that could attack them outside of Ben's sensory skill or possessed no blood at all. Ben trusted Lucian to keep them orientated in the right direction, despite their many zigzags. Their goal was to travel a few kilometers and find a hidden natural spring that was the original goal of the missing squads. Inside the spring was a newly discovered type of rock that seemed to complement water-based enchantments quite well. It was theorized that these rocks could create new natural water springs, thus providing fresh and clean water to the populace. Their goal was to both find the missing squads and the rock, though the missing squad was the priority at the current time. Another 30 minutes later, Ben froze, his chest squeezed at what he sensed. For once he hoped his skill was wrong. "Lucian," he said, breaking the silence. Stopping, Lucian turned his eyebrow arching in question. 25 meters straight ahead, Ben's voice croaked. His throat felt suddenly dry as his eyes welled with unshed tears. Light sprung into existence. Holding a lit torch, Lucian pushed forwards. Neither cared about being stealthy anymore. "No," Lucian dropped to his knees. "Danielle," he moaned with a sob. Before them was a husk of a body, which was undeniably their deceased friend. Devoid of nearly all her blood, Danielle was nothing but a shell of her former self. All that remained was skin, bones, and clothes. "What could do this?" Lucian growled. Ben opened his mouth, but no words came out. He stared down at the corpse. Finally, he spoke. Something drained her blood. Lucian whipped head at him. Ben could see the controlled rage simmering and grief behind his friend's eyes, and even an unspoken accusation. Then Lucian shook his head. "I know it wasn't you." Ben turned back to their deceased friend. "We don't know what happened. Some monster could have drained her blood after whatever killed her." "Are we looking at the same thing?" He brushed his thumb over Danielle's neck. "There are no injuries on her besides this small mark at the neck. Whatever killed her did so by draining her blood as she lived." Ben grimaced. As much as he didn't want to agree, Lucian was right about the way Danielle had died. It was a horrific way to go. One Ben had witnessed many times since his magic took blood from his enemies, whether they be dead or alive. Nothing bothered the two as they stood over Danielle's corpse. In fact, all the monsters were gone from his blood sense, as if this was a territory they dare not tread. With the light from the torch, Ben took in his surroundings. Blackened and crooked branches littered the area. It was as if many explosions had gone off. Ben ran his hand over one of the trunks. Little bits of charcoal flaked off as he brushed away at it. The power of fire had belonged to Danielle, but to these massive trees, her magic had hardly harmed them. "What do you want to do?" Ben asked, wiping his hand on his trousers. A minute of silence passed. "Let's go back, we've done enough for today." Ben silently agreed. The others in her group were still missing, but it was unlikely they would also be found alive, considering Danielle had been one of the stronger members of their group. And night would be falling soon, and despite the jungle already being dark, that was when the monsters became very active. Only fools would tread through the jungle mere at night. Fools, or those wishing to die. The corpse went into Lucian's personal storage space. Kai could see the man's eyes were bloodshot in the low light of the torch. Blinking out of existence, the torch and light vanished. There was a snap and rustle of leaves as Ben sensed his friend fly upwards and out of the range of his senses. Following, Ben broke through layer after layer until finally he crossed the top of the jungle. Covering his arm over his eyes, he was blinded by the unobstructed light. Lucian was gone. The man was already a dot in the distance. Ben could excuse his friend's shitty behavior only because he knew that Lucian and Danielle had been a thing off and on. The death of their friend was undoubtedly hitting him hard at the moment. Each flap of his blood wings propelled him over the jungle. Despite what was impressive flying speed, Lucian's dot eventually vanished. Between his short-range teleportation and space manipulation, the man could travel across any distance faster than most. By the time night had fallen, Ben had finally returned to New Hope. Stepping up to the gate, the guards saluted him. Ben scanned their half-hidden faces, recognizing a few. "Greetings, sir," one of the guards said. "Evening, gentlemen," Ben responded. "Has General Lucian returned?" "Aye, the general returned an hour ago." The man was in a determined fury, marched off without a word. "Dan," hissed the guard next to him as he bumped his armored forearm against the others, creating a metallic ring. "What?" Dan asked. "I see. Thanks, gentlemen. Have a good watch." Ben proceeded into the city and took the path straight to his parents. The path was rowdy and crowded as he walked to his parents' home. But Ben remained quiet, contemplating the day's events. He felt at a loss. It felt like the harder he tried to save people, the more he lost. Just in the last month, he could count the number of people he knew who had died on two hands. The gods had promised humans salvation, but instead all they were offered was delayed death. He quickly found himself in front of a familiar door. The smell of mint invaded his nose. His eyes shifted to the culprit in the flower bed outside the window. His mother had taken on cultivating plants and flowers after the transfer to the myriad of worlds. Walking inside, both his parents were both sitting down reading. "What's wrong?" His mother ran up to him and both her hands on the side of his face. Ben stared between them at their feet. The moment he looked up, he knew he might cry. His body and mind were exhausted. No matter what he did, the scent of death followed him. It lingered like a stench he couldn't wash off, slowly taking and taking those he knew, until in time it would finally take him. "Ben?" his mother questioned, concerned. His father, too, had walked up and placed a heavy hand fell on his shoulder. "Danielle's gone," he sniffled. "Found her body in the jungle, a husk of it." "I'm so sorry, honey." She embraced him. His body was racked by a single sob. A while later, the family of three sat at the table eating dinner. His parents had waited until he came home to start. They were familiar with his unpredictable schedule, but Friday was always family dinner night. During dinner, his parents did their best to distract him from the day's woes. His father discussed new, interesting data regarding his findings of gravity and the effects that magic had on it. But Ben was too tired to listen properly. When dinner had ended, his father asked, "Will you stay the night, son?" "I think—" Ben froze. His blood sense was picking up a mass of people walking in organized lines towards the house. His eyes flicked to the ceiling, where above the house a number of people had just appeared, including Lucian. Most of the others he knew too. Dragging his dagger out, he slashed it deeply across his arm. Blood gushed out as he severed some arteries. It began pooling around his body immediately. His voice came out panicked. "Mom? Dad?" Then his world was consumed by fire. Chapter 59. Titan Prime. Everything turned dark. It wasn't just the lights that had vanished, but the sound. Complete silence. Kai felt himself let out a scream, but nothing came out. Nothing he could hear, at least. His body stretched and pulled and shrunk back to normal. Seconds, maybe minutes later, the world resumed. The lights and sound returned as if someone had flicked a switch. Kai was on his knees and hands, gasping for breath. Eyes wide, he stared at the stone flooring, his stare vacant. "Always a few," a man chuckled as he passed by Kai. The man's boots made no sound on the stone, but Kai barely heard the man. Now that he was free from the terrors of long-range space teleportation, his mind spun to the last words he had heard from Akane. "Good luck, Ben." His heart raced, even his breathing stopped, his mind too busy trying to contemplate what he had heard. What did Akane call me? Did she really? Black spots threatened his vision. His lungs were beginning to seize due to lack of air. Without warning, a wet and rough sensation scraped against his arm. Twisting his head, he saw Asteria licking his arm. Concern was evident in her eyes. The sight of her brought clarity to his situation, freeing him from his self-induced panic. "Safe?" Asteria's childlike voice reached his mind. Nodding his head, his breathing calmed. He was safe. No one knew of his former identity as Ben, not even Akane. His face warmed slightly. He felt stupid, realizing he must have misheard her or projected his former name over his new one and didn't realize it. He had never slipped up and exposed his past. That he remembered. Still on his hands and knees, his anxiety had cleared. It was then he began noticing the new peculiar sensations surrounding him. The mana that permeated the air of this new world was so much denser than anything he had ever felt. The density of mana always fluctuated and was never the same. But this was the first time he had ever felt such a difference all at once. It was thick, as if the very air was saturated with it. Like a humid day, but without the humidity. With wobbly legs, he collected Asteria into his arms and stood. Immediately he became aware of the changes to his body. When his foot came down, it was heavier than he had intended. It also lacked any sound as it fell onto the stone. His body was also heavier than it had been on Eris. Not overly so that it would be dangerous for a mortal child, but noticeable enough to feel the difference. With his gravity magic, he had become sensitive to weight and pressure. It makes sense. The planet is larger, so it should have more gravity than Eris. However, his instincts were telling him that the gravity was actually less than it should be for a planet this size. His eyes were drawn to the grey walls and ceiling. There was no mortar between the stones, making it appear as one solid object. The sight reminded him of the exterior walls of the Ashbourne capital. The difference was that runes and glyphs had been drawn across every surface, including the floor and ceiling. Kai watched with complete bewilderment as the runes shifted, turning one rune into a new one. Part of a rune traveled from the left wall across the floor and to the opposite side. It was like a puzzle, realigning itself to make a new solution. He had no clue to any of their meaning, but even he could tell they were not even in the same league as the ones on his sword and armor. A powerful presence radiated from them, but it was so subtle and hidden that he wouldn't have noticed, if not for the fact that he was examining them in detail. Identify gave him nothing. "Clear the platform, clear the platform," a new squeaky voice entered his mind. Alarmed, he looked around for the being in question, but saw no obvious signs of them. Most of the other passengers had already exited the room, except for the few young people still adjusting like him. He proceeded to the exit, keeping a tight hold on Asteria. A mixture of nervousness and excitement flooded his being. He had made it to the largest planet in the myriad of worlds. To others of this modern day, it might not seem like a big deal, but to him it was huge. After all, he had died before humanity had ever found itself able to leave New Earth. Then he had come back to life almost 1,200 years later, when interplanetary travel within the myriad of worlds was a common event. He wasn't sure how he had died on New Earth, only to be reborn on Eris. But this was his first time traveling off-planet while being alive or conscious of it. Stepping through the doorway, Kai had to blink his eyes multiple times to make sure he was seeing things correctly. Beyond the door he had just passed, he had seen a simple empty hallway. But as he crossed the threshold into what should have been said hallway, he had found himself inside a massive room. Thousands of beings were traversing the room. Kai stood stunned at the sight as his eyes shifted from one being to the next. Dwarves, elves, orcs, and demons. He recognized many of the races by the description he had been told and the statues of the gods, but there were at least another 24 he couldn't figure out without identify. Giant, gnome, adept level 31, insectoid, ESE, kobold. His mind spun at the wonders. All his life he had been surrounded by humans, only able to see humanity and the monsters that would threaten its existence. But now he could truly see the myriad of worlds for what it truly was. A place where all the species could come together and exist as one. A harmony that would have never existed without the gods. Feeling a pinch on his arm, he realized Asteria had nipped him to break him out of his trance. He gave her a wide smile. He felt giddy with excitement. He proceeded to walk through the room to where multiple lines of species were. Above each line was a glyph that somehow he knew in his mind to read Guild. Guild? The next sign over read as business. Taking out the slip of paper his father had given him, he read it over before placing it back into his pocket. The paper contained a list of instructions for him so he could arrive at his destination promptly and safely. He stepped into the customs line, or the Titan Prime equivalent, and passed through without any difficulties. He had been asked some questions by a gnome which sat on a stool behind a counter, which were about his intentions on Titan Prime. Passing under a sign that read as Trinity, he exited the building. He couldn't help but stop as his eyes went wide once more. He found himself at the top of a long stairway that was nearly as wide as a city block. A few hundred stairs led down to a city. No, he wasn't sure something of this magnitude could even be called a city. Stretching out beyond his vision was a civilization so massive and daunting. Kai had never seen the likes of it before. It was literally an uncountable number of buildings and streets that stretched on past what he could see. It was the same on his left or right. Some areas appeared vacant of buildings, hosting open fields or trees, but the majority of it was pure civilization on a scale beyond what he could imagine. Asteria perked up as she scanned the incredible sights too. New worries formed as he thought about how the hell he was supposed to navigate a city like this. Traveling through the colossal city would take days. The only saving grace was that this wasn't the city he was supposed to be attending the academy in. His eyes shifted up and he almost swore, "Holy." Above him was the most mesmerizing sight. Planets orbited all over the sky, at a number he had never seen before. There were so many that there were barely any gaps between them. It was not only the quantity, but the closeness to which they orbited. On New Earth, humanity had seen the planets pass by all the time, but never had they been so awe-inspiring or as detailed as this. He watched with a smile on his face as a moon passed between Titan Prime and a large green planet passing overhead. Some planets moved slowly, barely making any distance in the sky, while others seemed to speed out of sight. Despite there being no visible sun, the city was bright as if the unseen sun was shining on it. Kai stayed there a few minutes enjoying the sights. There was no doubt he appeared as a tourist, but he couldn't find himself caring. 15 minutes later he moved on, carefully following his father's written instructions, and traveled to another building nearby with intercity teleporters that linked all the cities on Titan Prime. The way his father explained it was that on Titan Prime, the civilized beings controlled two major territories of Kvenland and Eden. Kvenland was the civilization beacon of the myriad of worlds, whereas Eden conformed more with nature. But both territories were just a small fraction of the colossal Titan Prime, of which most remained to the wilds and monsters. Inside Kvenland, there were a total of 99 smaller territories that each could be a match in scale and size for multiple empires on Eris, but there would never be a comparison of power. Titan Prime was heralded to host the strongest beings in the known universe. The 99 territories stood separate and yet united despite their distance and the many different factions that ruled them. They were all ultimately a part of the same civilization, but stood apart in other aspects that his father didn't elaborate on. Kai was to travel to the territory of Elderwood and attend the Elderwood Prime Academy. He had no choice or decision over the academy he was to attend, not that he aware of the difference. All he did know was his father had attended the same academy as a student, shortly after he came into his own magic. Once he arrived at the academy, he was somehow supposed to find a man named Niles Endo and proceed from there. Asteria was quiet throughout their travels to the intercity teleporter and the time waiting for their turn to teleport. Part of Kai felt guilty. Asteria had been dumped on him so quickly, a strange and unknown human to the young fox that she had only met the day prior. Now they were to be inseparable in their growth and adventure. They remained silent and observed their surroundings with interest. Eventually it became their turn, and they arrived at their second teleport station of the day. Exiting, he found one of the slow-moving giant planets above still dominate the sky, but his angle at which he viewed it was changed. Not significantly changed, but noticeable. The thought of having to travel all this distance without the ease and availability of these teleporters gave him pause. He imagined it would take weeks, if not months. Mass teleportation was literally a gift from the gods. Kai followed signs down a designated path to a transportation hub. There he had to buy a ticket for a ride to the academy. He covertly examined the other species. A dark green scaled bipedal creature had just walked by him. The strangest part of the being was its tail, which he admitted he observed longer than he should have. As if sensing his gaze, the reptilian creature turned its head and glared at him. From the being's snout mouth a tongue flicked out and casually licked around its mouth. Lizardkin, forging level 73. Kai got the impression that the being was either messing with him or found him appetizing. "Careful with your eyes, pod boy." The lizard being hissed out that last part in what he considered a male lizard's voice, lest you gain the attention of some being you do not want. With that, the lizard being turned around and continued its way, while Kai stood frozen at his first interaction with sentient being of another species, as long as he didn't count the kitsune. "Grumpy," Asteria said. "Yes. Let's try and see if we can get to the academy without offending anyone else," Kai said gently. He ran his hand down Asteria's head and back. Her fur was soft and smooth. Not comparable to the illustrious fur of Akane, but he had a feeling that might have something more to do with her realm than fur maintenance. He followed the lizard man at a distance, not because he wanted to, but they just so happened to be traveling to the same area of the transportation hub. Getting in line behind the lizardkin, Kai remained quiet as he observed the ongoings. He nearly let out an audible groan when he discovered the lizardkin was heading to the Elderwood Prime Academy too. But that didn't stop Asteria from groaning into his mind. "Ugh, can we take a different ride?" "The lizard man smells," she groaned. Kai's upper lifted with a small smile, but he said nothing in response. "Destination?" the small sickly green being asked with pointed teeth. It appeared so thin and frail, and if Kai was being honest with himself, very hideous. He was having trouble determining if the being was old or young. Neither its voice nor face gave him any clue. It was all too alien. Its eyes remained focused on whatever it was doing behind the desk, while it waited for an answer. Goblin, forging level 96. Elderwood Prime Academy. The goblin's eyes flicked to his for a moment. With a snort it wrote something down. "The price of travel is 4 silvers. Passing the coins over, he received a ticket in return. Again there was a glyph on it. It seemed like glyphs and runes played a major role and importance in society outside of Ashbourne Kingdom. The world he knew was expanding. Chapter 60. A new form of travel. Kai sat back and relaxed, or attempted to. His body remained tense. Everything he was experiencing was new and exciting, but also nerve-wracking. It was as if he was back in the jungle mere, exploring the dark unknowns for the very first time. With everything that had happened in the last few days, he felt exhausted, both mentally and physically. His entire world had changed so drastically. Just the knowledge he possessed now weighed heavily on his mind. The kitsune and his home, their secrets. He stealthily gazed down at his new companion, Asteria. She inquisitively sniffed the material that they sat on and suddenly reeled back. Clearly she didn't like what she smelled. The two of them were seated in a small sectional compartment with 8 total seats, 4 of which faced the other. Between the seating was a sturdy rectangular wooden table. Above the back of the seats, a glass wall separated each compartment from the next, along with a sliding door of glass. Upon entering the small room, the glass had been clear, but once they closed the door, the glass immediately turned blurry. A small hum could be heard once the doors had closed, alerting that some kind of enchantments may be active. Kai assumed they were meant for privacy. Asteria jumped onto the table and began sniffing it. Kai smiled lightly. He was proud to have been chosen to share his fate with the daughter of Akane and princess to the kitsune. Still, the weight of such a responsibility compounded his nervousness. His eyes roamed the cabin in which they sat, looking for threats. Thankfully, there seemed to be none at the moment. The cabin in which they traveled was just one section of many in a multi-compartment transportation vehicle called a train that moved by a feat of enchantments and tamed monsters. The large cabin was roomy, with sectional seating and plenty of space around. Some seats even seemed to cater to being with tails, which was an odd sight. They were traveling down what was called a lane, an empty space through a city and territory specifically designated for transport with trains only. There would be multiple stops in the region of Elderwood until eventually it reached the station where the academy was located. The ride was smooth, incredibly so. If it wasn't for the fact that the scenery was a blur outside the windows, he would have assumed the train wasn't moving. After investigating the seats, Asteria now stood on her hind legs and pressed against the window, taking in the scenery. With nothing else to do at the moment, Kai took the time to examine his distracted companion. Forest Fox, Foundation Level 65. Asteria's identify tag had changed since he had first met her. Part of him wondered if the illusion was an effortless task or one that required some concentration. Asteria looked so much like Akane, except where Akane had black fur on her tail. Asteria only had some on each of her paws, giving the appearance that she was wearing socks. The crimson fur was a match for her mother. Kai wondered what magic the young kitsune possessed. There was a lot to figure out and plan. Eventually, Asteria let out a growl that truthfully sounded more adorable than fearsome. "Everything is too fast. I can't see anything." Kai chuckled at the irritated kitsune, which prompted her to turn on him. "Don't make fun of me. I bet you can't even see anything either." Kai turned his head to the outside. All he could see was a green blur outside. "I can see a tree," he joked. Instead of a verbal response, Asteria sent an emotion of annoyance to his mind. They watched the blurring scenery for a few minutes. However, every so often, Asteria would take a peek at him before turning back to the view. "What?" he asked after the 10th time she peeked. Eventually, she spoke to him again. "What's my mother like?" Andromeda?" Kai was startled. "Don't you know?" "No. She didn't spend much time with me and then she left." Asteria's ears drooped. Her small figure seemed to deflate, making her appear even smaller than before. Kai felt a pang of sadness and guilt on behalf of his new partner. Her mother had spent the last year watching over and judging him instead of being with her only daughter. And now, only a day after Andromeda's return to the village, Asteria had been essentially kicked out. Not for anything she had done, but to grow and prove herself. If he had rejected traveling with Asteria, would Andromeda have kept her in the village, or pushed her onto someone else, or perhaps made her go alone? Andromeda is one of the most special beings I've ever met. Lazy, spiteful, gluttonous. She is a troublemaker. He couldn't help but smile, thinking of all the trouble she had gotten him into. In retrospect, he could laugh about it now, but at the time he was stressed. "Liar!" she shouted into his mind. The sudden loud noise caused Kai to bounce in his seat like he had been shocked. The action did not go unnoticed. A few beings turned to look at him. Most turned away, uninterested, but some continued to stare. "Papa says Mama is the embodiment of all that is kitsune. She is the most cunning, beautiful, and strongest being, and no one is stronger." "I'm sorry, Asteria. I didn't mean to imply your mother is weak or of a bad nature. From what I know of your mother, she is a being of great respect and strength. She has protected and helped me during the last year, probably more than I know." Kai tried to run a hand down Asteria's back, but she bristled at his touch. He decided to look back out the window. "I was trying to be funny, I guess. For as much help as your mother gave me, she also liked to challenge and prank me. I am still trying to come to grips with the absence of her company. I'm truly going to miss her." Asteria seemed to settle down after listening to Kai's explanation. "Because I am a kind and thoughtful princess of the kitsune, I have decided to forgive you. But you must tell me stories of my mother." Her tone left no room for argument. "Princess, huh? I hope she isn't as spoiled as Akane," he thought to himself. Kai spent the next hour recalling the stories and events that he had gone through with Akane. Though he kept silent about her most troublesome pranks in case the young kitsune was impressionable and decided to imitate her mother. And so she burned the Credillion out of existence, saving the city and its people. Only after she let thousands die. But he didn't say that part. Amazing. Her crimson-slitted eyes glittered with hopes and dreams. Tell me more. Tell me more, she demanded. Asteria hopped up and down on her seat like a jumping child. Realizing he was beginning to run out of appropriate stories, Kai decided to switch up the target. How about you tell me a story about you? I would love to hear about your life. You were a secret to everyone in the village. Instantly, the energetic fox wilted. I was born, mother left, Papa taught me. The end. He wanted to groan. There was obviously a lot to unpack there in that short statement. It was obvious Asteria missed her home and family. She wasn't like Kai, who had already spent a year away from his family. Surely that wasn't all that happened. I ate. Kai felt his stomach twist. Seeing her moping fox face made him want to do anything to cheer her up. What was your favorite food to eat? Boar. Kai watched the crestfallen kitsune grow increasingly sadder by the second. After a few seconds, he couldn't take the sight of the pitiful fox anymore. He scooped Asteria up into his arms and held her tightly against his chest. What's wrong? He asked, though he was certain he already knew. I miss Papa, she wailed into his mind. At the same time, she burrowed her head into the crook of his elbow. I miss home. Kai's heart tightened. This poor small kitsune was nothing more than a child, ripped away suddenly from all she knew too soon. His thoughts floated to his own parents in his first life. Their lives had been stolen abruptly. He had been saved from his loneliness and sorrow by his new family. Perhaps he could help spare Asteria some of that pain and suffering. I understand you miss home. Think of it this way. In a few years, we can return home. You'll be able to tell your family about all the interesting things you did and the food you ate. Asteria's ears perked up. Still, she kept her head against his sleeve. Just a little more, he thought. Perhaps we can be family Asteria. After all, we will be companions for the next few years. I can be your uncle or something. What? Why uncle? She looked up, genuinely mystified. What do you mean? You're only a year and a half old and I'm nearly 17. Yay? She tilted her head. A familiar sight. It was the one Akane had given him many times when she was playing stupid or believed him to be stupid. There is a large gap between 1 and 17, he pointed out. I know my numbers, dummy. Asteria stomped her front paws onto his chest. The impact did nothing. I'll have you know, I am considered an adult among the kitsune already. I've had my magic for half a year, only a little less than you. Kai gave his companion a critical eye. The fur beneath her eyes was darker and still slightly wet. A little snot dripped down her nose. He wanted to bark a laugh, but he kept his cool. The last thing he wanted was to upset the little kitsune again. In the end, he shrugged. Okay, no to uncle then. How about kin? She appeared to give it some consideration before nodding. That is acceptable. You may be this princess's kin. I'm honored. He gave Asteria a small smile. I'd say that's a step up from food servant for a particular spoiled fox. After their fourth stop, Kai quickly grew bored of looking outside. The sunless light still shined down just as strong as it had half a day ago across the region. He turned his attention to the glass door and the passing figures beyond. He made a game in his head, guessing the species based on the skin color and size of the blurred beings that passed by. Identify did not work beyond the glass, so there was no way to tell if he was right or wrong. Eventually, he stopped his game when a loud growling echoed in their compartment. Kai blinked and looked down at the fox, who sat flat on the table whimpering. The sound reminded him of his own hungry. Neither of them had eaten in the last half-day. If it had been Akane present, he was certain the wooden table would have been half-eaten by now. Hungry? He asked. Their mental connection remained, despite not having talked in the last hour. All he received was a pitiful whimper in response. I'll go see if they have a vendor that sells some food on this train. As he made to stand up, he placed his hand on the table and then paused. On his finger was a ring of storage. Can't believe I forgot about this. The day's excitement had led him to forget about the new ring he had been given not even a day ago. Might be food in there. Kai connected his mana to the ring, like he would his enchanted sword. Feeding the ring mana, it gave life to the enchantments as they activated from their dormant state. Connection established. A three-dimensional cube formed in his mind. His armor floated in place, unmoving near the top right of the cube, while his sword lay across the floor sheathed, nearly spanning the length of the entire floor. It wasn't much space, but it was plenty for what he currently possessed. When his father had asked for all of his belongings, which he was bringing the day before, he assumed they had been stored inside his ring for the travels. Now he realized that his father must have worked with Akane to pack the ring for him to prepare him for his journey. He easily found what he was looking for next. A series of wooden boxes of plain design with an apparent removable top, on which was a note was laying on top of, that he read as food. Holding out his palms face up, he willed one of the boxes to summon into his hands. Instead of appearing in his hands like he had seen many weapons over the last year, the box appeared under them, which promptly fell onto the table with a clap. Kai blinked. Going to take some practice. Grasping the tightly sealed lid, he slipped it off the box. At once, a wonderful smell enveloped the room. He recognized the dish. Orange sauce dosed heavily in cinnamon that covered tender boar meat. Cinnamon chunk stew. It was the same his mother always made every birthday. The sight of it warmed him. Asteria was on her feet, completely mesmerized by the spawning food. She was in daze, shifting back and forth. "Help yourself," Kai said. While he was finding a spoon in his ring, Asteria was tearing through the food. Just as he was about to take a bite, the glass unblurred. Kai blinked and turned his head to the outside. The train had begun decelerating. An ancient stone wall blocked his vision. They had arrived. Chapter 61. Admissions. "By the bloody 9, Kai whispered to himself. Standing at the Elderwood Prime Academy entrance, Kai found himself stopping to gawk at the sight. Built right into the decline of a valley, the buildings looked simple at first glance. Stone built onto the stone, nothing screamed extravagant or prestigious. A short and plain stone wall stretched onto his left and right. Even his 8-year-old self could have climbed over it easily. How can this be one of the prestigious prime academies? He whispered to himself in disbelief. There was a certain timelessness about the academy, as if time remained frozen to keep it so simple, like it was openly deceiving those who came to visit one of the most prestigious academies, only to find themselves in a quaint old village instead. It was quite beautiful, and the simplicity of it reminded Kai of home. But for an academy of notoriety and legend, it seemed wrong. Kai stood there confused. He wasn't the only one. Others who had disembarked from the train also appeared at a loss, while some walked in without concern. Taking a deep breath, he stepped through the threshold. Immediately he was beckoned over by a guard he had not seen from the other side. "Admissions or visitor?" the guard asked swiftly. The same question probed his mind. Off to the side, other beings were called off the path and being asked the same question, while others kept walking down the path, unbothered. Kai blinked his eyes and identified again. Nothing. He found himself slightly unsettled by the fact that he had no idea what race or species of being he was standing in front of. The unknown being was covered head to boot in armor with the same texture of wood. The smooth armor gave the illusion, or possibly reality, that someone had carved it straight from a tree trunk. All that was visible of the mysterious guard were its red eyes through the helmet slit. "Admissions," Kai responded, after probably gawking too long. Twisting its body, it held up an armored arm and pointed to a house-sized grey stone building behind it. "You'll find the admissions office inside." Turning away, it had already begun beckoning another potential student or visitor to it. Kai thanked the guard with a nod and walked off. To his side, Asteria trotted with him, looking adorably confused. Stepping inside the moderately sized doorless building, Kai had to double-take. The inside of the lobby itself was larger than the entirety of the building's appearance from the outside. Varying species filled the lobby, some were sitting and others walking around. Decorative and exotic furniture gave appearance to a more modern and wealthier scene, the complete opposite of its outside representation. Large marbled pillars propped up the massive room, and art and paintings were against each pillar and wall. Each depiction was either of a battle or a portrait of an individual. None were human. One portrait was of a wizened male elf with extremely bushy eyebrows. On the plaque below, it read, Arwin Tellis, inventor and creator of the Tellis conversion of mass enchantment principle. Graduate of Elderwood Prime Academy. Born 3-389-2, died 4-021. What the? If Kai was reading the dates right, then the elf in the portrait had lived a minimum of 16,000 years. Possibly much longer, depending on when the Third Age ended. The date was currently in the Sixth Age of the year 2155. Humans had only arrived in the myriad of worlds less than 1,300 years ago. To have been alive for 1,300 years, let alone 16,000. The concept of it was difficult to fathom. A stray thought came to mind. Kai couldn't help but wonder if he would still have remained alive to this day if he hadn't been betrayed. Statistically, the answer was no. But his blood magic class had always done a great job at healing him during fights. Short of losing a limb, he was almost unstoppable in a fight, outlasting his opponents. Now he had no regeneration or healing. It was an entirely different style of combat that he was still growing accustomed to. After checking out a few other portraits, Kai knew it was time to head over to admissions and get it over with. His body felt jittery, likely full of excitement at the prospect of one of his goals becoming reality. Calling Asteria, who was eyeing paintings of battles, they walked to a separate room where the admissions office was located. Crossing into the room, he took note of everything. There were 10 glass offices, 9 of which had distorted glass, similar to the train, but cloudier. Each office had varying species assembled in front of them. Among the 60 beings in the room, only one other was human. Placing Asteria around his neck, Kai strolled to the back of one of the lines. He tried to listen to the conversations around him, but no sound reached him. Even Asteria's huff seemed dampened, despite her being next to his ear. It didn't take long until he was next in line, with each individual taking 10 to 15 minutes. The glass to the office unblurred as the door slid open. A dwarf left the office, practically skipping to the exit. Stepping inside the office, the room felt sweltering compared to the chilled lobby. Kai sucked in air and stopped himself from laughing as he saw a hulking orc hunched over behind a disproportionately small desk. Come in, and close the door," the orc spoke without looking. His voice was deep and clear, without the slightest detectable accent. Closing the door, Kai blinked when the glass didn't blur like before. Just as Kai was about to grab the door and try to open and close it again, the orc said, "Leave it. The enchantments are working. It's not frosted from the inside." There was an amused smirk on the tusked orc's face, which was still facing toward the papers he was writing on. Taking the seat opposite the orc, Kai took the time to examine the orc while the being finished his task. Even with them both being seated, the orc easily towered 2 feet over him. He might have been intimidated, if not for the silly tunic that had been cut at the sleeves to give room to his bulging muscles that would even put Sven to shame. A hexagonal insignia of a pair of hands with some kind of spell between them rested at the center of the tunic, above and below which read Elderwood Prime Academy and Admissions. The office was filled with piles of papers reaching the ceiling that seemed to have no reason or order. Mana gave life to the glowing lights above. "Sorry about that. This time of year there is always a lot of paperwork," the orc said as he shuffled some pages into a desk drawer. Offering a massive hand across the desk, he completely enveloped and shook Kai's hand with a gentleness that he would not have expected in such a muscular and hulking specimen. "My name is Timothy, an admissions specialist here at Elderwood Prime Academy. To get the ball rolling, will you please tell me your name?" "Kaismo Cineris, and this is Asteria." He placed his hand on top of the small fox's head, sitting on his lap. With his other hand, he subtly pulled at his collar to alleviate some of the heat and sweat forming below his clothing. "Pleasure," Timothy let out a toothy smirk. "I apologize for the heat. My blood boils. It's not something I can control. We will wrap this up quickly and get you out of here." "Kaismo, I take it you are trying to enroll here. First year?" "Yes and no." Kai shook his head. "I already completed my first year at the Ashbourne Academy on Eris." The orc's eyes widened. Ashbourne Academy, you say? Ah, I was sorry to hear about its destruction. Kai's went wide for a second before narrowing. You know about its destruction? Of course. Even the destruction of capital on a low world is big news in the myriad of worlds. Normally, we would require enchanted paperwork to provide proof of first-year completion. Timothy ran his large hand under his chin, causing his arm muscles to swell even more. The tunic looked like it was about to rip apart. But it is obvious you wouldn't have any with the academy being destroyed. Opening the top desk drawer, he placed a crystal cube on the desk between them. Because you are enrolling as a second year, we will have to perform a small test. Before enrolling, students must not have had access to their magic longer than 3 years. 'Tis the rules. The prime academies are education systems aimed at the newly awakened. Because you are entering the second year, it will be 4 years for you. Tapping the seamless crystal cube at the top, it generated a small hum for a few seconds before stopping. Excellent, Timothy exclaimed. According to the cube, your skeletal structure is only 17 years of age, bringing you within the appropriate age bracket for your species. Forging level 24, not too shabby for 1 year of magic and coming from a frontier world. Timothy nodded to himself. And your companion, Forest Fox, between 1 to 2 years old, foundation level 65. Good. Kai felt his heart speed up for a moment until he heard Timothy confirm his physical body's age and not the age of his soul. He realized now that his most precious and kept secret could have been found out in that moment had they measured the age of his soul. A part of him wanted to admonish himself for being lax and letting his guard down, but the logical side of him knew that there was nothing he could have done. He had not been aware such a test would be taking place after all. His fear abated when he realized Asteria had jumped onto the desk. He went to grab her, but Timothy waved him off without looking. Gingerly, Asteria placed her paw on top of the mysterious cube, only for nothing to happen. Dejected, she hovered near Timothy, taking interest in what he was writing down. Bringing in an additional companion, even a non-combatant pet, will cost additional fees, Timothy said. Kai chuckled and mumbled, nothing new there. Timothy let out what looked like a menacing smile, but Kai assumed it was just the orc's normal smile. Sounds like an interesting story. A very long story, Kai answered back. Before I forget, I believe someone is sponsoring my attendance here. Timothy whipped his head up, his hand frozen over the paper. You should have mentioned that. We could have skipped the last few minutes. What is the name of your sponsor? Pulling out the piece of paper his father gave him, he read the name, Niles Endo. Paragon Niles is sponsoring you. Uncertainty in his voice, he gave Kai a more critical gaze, as if he was looking deep to find something he couldn't see. Paragon? Wait, Paragon? Does Dad have a Paragon realm person sponsoring me? Kai frantically read the paper over one more time, but nothing indicated the sponsor's realm. My father set up the sponsorship. I don't know if this Niles Endo is the same one to whom you are referring. Frowning, Timothy stood up. Stay here. I will be right back. Now standing, the orc was even larger than Kai had imagined. The small desk did no justice to the small titan of an orc. Stalking out of the room, the doorway barely seemed big enough as he quickly left. The door remained open, and Kai could see other potential students spying on him from outside in line. After a minute of sitting quietly, he decided to question Asteria. You know anything about this? I'm 1.5. You think they told me any of this? She rolled her eyes. Just as Kai was about to retort, the door slid open with Timothy came back inside, carrying a file he didn't have before. I found it, he said, slapping a folder against his palm. I was certainly surprised. We only get about 50 to 100 sponsored students a year. Sitting back in the chair, the orc sunk back to manageable heights so that Kai didn't feel an ache in his neck having to look up. Yup, it's all here, Timothy said, reading the files inside. Your classes have already been settled, along with payment. Everything looks in order. We can skip a few steps, it seems. He passed Kai the file after slipping in a packet of papers. Kai accepted the file and opened it up to take a look. The first page included nearly everything about him: his name, description, class, and magic type. Even his unfinished finals appearance from a few days ago was included inside. Intrigued, he flipped to the next page, which included his courses and their locations for the trimester. They all revolved around fighting and monster hunting, except for the myriad of World's History class. He noticed there was nothing similar to the field training course from the Ashbourne Academy. How are the students supposed to grow in levels? I've included a packet in the back of your file with relevant information, including the rules, most of which will be covered during orientation. I believe the next one will be 1 hour from now in the assembly hall. If you miss that one, then the next will be on the Marrow at midday. Kai took the file and papers and placed them in his ring of storage. He had taken a few minutes on the train to figure out how to store items. It proved easy at first, but placing an item exactly where he wanted inside the ring wasn't something he had been able to figure out before they arrived. Questions filled Kai's mind, but he figured most of them would be answered by reading the packet inside or by going to the orientation. Timothy's reached out to the metal plate he had placed on his desk a minute prior and waved his hand. Immediately the plate began glowing with beautiful glyphs. It looked more like art than the language of magic to Kai's untrained eyes. Touch the plate and it will record your mana and biological signature. Then you will officially become a student of Elderwood Prime Academy. Kai placed his palm against the metal. It was hot to the touch and kept getting hotter until he had to rip his hand away. Holding his palm to his face, there was nothing to indicate he had just been burned. Even his health hadn't dipped despite the pain. Timothy's waved his hand again next to the plate. You next, little Asteria. Asteria placed a paw against the plate and held it there for longer than Kai until she jumped back. Still, on the desk, she lowered the front of her body and growled at the plate. Waving his hand once more, the plate stopped glowing. With a nod to himself, Timothy stood and shook their hand and paw. All done. Allow me to congratulate you on enrolling at the Elderwood Prime Academy. I wish you both the best of luck. Chapter 62. Follow the path. Follow the path, Kai muttered. That was what Timothy had said to him right before he left. He would have thought the orc to be messing with him, but his father's instructions said the exact same thing. The path in question continued down into the valley and over the hill beyond, with no buildings in sight. The valley consisted of few trees, leaving no chance for anything to hide in the area. Something about the situation made him feel like he was being played for a fool. The only saving grace was he didn't seem to be the only one confused, as a few students ahead of him that he had seen at the admissions office turned and twisted their heads, appearing as baffled as him. In his arms, he could hear Asteria sniffing the air. Strange, her voice entered his mind. What is strange? He asked. I'm not sure. She sniffed again. Something doesn't seem right. Sniffing the air, Kai smelled nothing. There, Asteria yelled. Kai stopped himself from jumping at the sudden loud mental intrusion. Where there? He looked around but saw nothing different, only a desolate hill lacking nature you would find in a thriving environment. There, ahead of you. When it became obvious that Kai had no idea what Asteria was referring to, she squirmed out of his grasp. The beings. Watch the beings, she sighed as she dropped to the ground. Kai stopped and spied on the few others ahead as they continued walking away on the path. After 10 seconds, he didn't see anything unusual. Can you just tell me what I'm supposed to be seeing? Mother, what have you done to me? Asteria dropped her head and shook it lightly. Are all humans so blind? Kai ran a hand down his face. Biting back a retort, he felt himself becoming annoyed. More like a Kani than she realizes. Once more he watched the nearest being, a dwarf. The distance between them steadily widened. Watch the being. The stout dwarf took short but rapid steps as he traversed the stone path. His reddish-brown hair was tied back into a lengthy braid down his back. Twisting his head to his left, the braid flicked to the opposite side and then back as he turned the other way. 15 seconds later, he was about to give up when the dwarf turned his head to the left again, and then again to the right. It was exactly as before, the same movement and time spent. When? He breathlessly whispered. An illusion had been placed without Kai or Asteria noticing. Had his mind been placed under an illusion? Or perhaps it had been layered over the dwarf? His hand shot up and covered his mouth. No, it's been here all along. His eyes went wide at the prospect. How to get out of it? His abilities couldn't do anything against illusions. Perhaps Asteria could take it down or pierce it, since her species seemed naturally inclined toward illusions, but his experience told him she couldn't. Even if she had figured out the gimmick didn't mean she could stop or pierce it. She was simply too young and weak at this time. His foot tapped as he considered his next step. Follow the path, he remembered. With no other options, he did so. Without warning, his entire vision changed. A gasp sounded out. Kai couldn't be sure if it was him, Asteria, or someone else. Gone was the lacking valley and hill before him. In its place, 4 massive white stone towers stretched into the sky 2 by 2, as if marking the edges of a square. There had to be miles between each of them, and yet they were all connected by a dozen layered open courtyards. Each courtyard was drastically different, with some having many buildings and others having less or none. It was like having a city stacked on top of another city. Past the buildings, the sky was visible. At the very top, the largest dome he had ever seen stretched overhead, atop the 4 towers connecting them all. Brilliant light reflecting off the dome hurt his eyes and caused him to bring his view down. He felt his breath stall. A bridge. They were on a bridge of glowing cobbled stones that stretched on for a mile until it reached the academy's base. The dwarf they had seen 40 yards away moments ago was now only a few feet away after looking as awed as he felt. Decorative trees of varying colors lined the sides of the enormous bridge. The bridge itself spanned an entire city block at its width, making Kai wonder what could possibly warrant such a wide bridge. To the left and right of the academy, identical bridges like the one he was standing on stretched on until he couldn't see them anymore. Each was miles long. Twisted his head, the old rustic village at the top of the hill he had passed before was gone, though a lone building he assumed to be the admissions office remained. Magnificent walls that put the Ashbourne capital's wall to shame stretched on into the unseen distance. Even with them being hundreds of feet tall, they were put to utter shame by the white towers they guarded. Kai found himself walking up to the edge of the bridge after something caught his eye. He was not even conscious of his doing so as he passed the trees and stopped at the edge. There was no railing or wall to block him from jumping off. Below the bridge, it was like a utopia of nature: lakes, rivers, streams, trees, and forests. The other side of the bridge was filled with great dunes of yellowish sand. He wondered if the other side of the other bridges would be filled with beautifully crafted environments. He had seen forests similar to the ones below before, but there was no comparing their splendor. It was as if someone had taken great pains to perfectly sculpt and preserve an exemplary example of nature right next to the academy. "Wow," Kai said after a few minutes of silence. Taking one last look, he set off across the rest of the bridge. There were only 30 minutes left until the last orientation of the day, and he still had a mile of the bridge to cross and to find the assembly hall. The closer he became to the towers, the more they loomed over him. They cast no shadow that he could see, for there was no sun in the light-filled sky. Between each of the dozen platforms were hundreds of feet separating them. More and more details became visible the closer he became. There was no lack of sculptures and statues decorating the massive structure. The towers themselves were comprised of pristine white bricks, each taller and much longer than him, as they stacked high into the sky to support the stunning architecture. At the base of the academy, the bridge led to a rectangular building connected between all the towers, with an entrance so massive even the Crodillion could have fit inside at full height. Entering the building, he was bombarded by the sight of thousands of beings, all spread out as they occupied the gigantic lobby that easily stretched on for miles. His attention was drawn by a short gnome woman, easily half the size of the average dwarf he had seen. She must have been the shortest humanoid being that Kai had seen yet. All new students, orientation will be in the assembly hall, which is halfway down on the left side of the room. For those who don't know your left side, just follow the mass of students, she called out, her voice carried flawlessly across the huge room. The assembly hall in question was about half a mile away from the entrance. "This place is massive," he said to quiet Asteria. "Yea," she responded simply. "Is something wrong?" he questioned. Asteria remained curled around his neck, just in case something happened. I felt something probing my mind as we entered. Alarm coursed through Kai. Are you okay? Yes. They only brushed up against my mind. Did you feel the same? No. I don't know. I didn't feel anything, but I was definitely distracted. He couldn't recall any instruction or mind magic as they entered. Again, that didn't mean much. Asteria was definitely more sensitive to that kind of magic since it was her main form of communication. Already the value of having her join him was showing its worth. Can they read our conversation? I don't know. They shouldn't be able to, but our connection is only basic mind magic innate to my species, like my illusions. Entering the assembly hall, Kai wasn't surprised to find it was another massive room, only with a raised stage at the end. Even with thousands of students scattered about the hall, there was plenty of space between them. Some of the beings were in groups, most associated with their specific species. Kai noted a few students walking up to others and introducing themselves, already trying to make connections and determine if this was a being worth knowing. High Elf, Foundation Level 89. Pixie, Forging Level 19. Imp, Foundation Level 37. Dark Elf, Adept Level 2. Beastkin, Forging Level 76. With there being thousands of new students, all only having awakened to their magic a few years prior, the levels were scattered mostly between the first two realms, but Kai saw a few already in the third. He suspected they already had their magic for a few years before attending the academy, or they were transfers like him. Either way, it was a sign of the mountain of challenges to overcome if they were to be his opponents in the future. For the next 10 minutes, Kai stood alone with Asteria still wrapped around his neck. No one approached him during that time, which was fine as it gave him plenty of time to observe. There didn't seem to be a majority among the races of species in the room. It was more like a certain half-dozen races dominated the populace, while the others were less so represented. He was happy to note humans were one of the dominate races represented at the academy. He had received a few odd stares from some of them, but other than that, no one had bothered him. What Kai found most odd was a lone goblin standing nearby that everyone seemed to give wide berth to. The goblin radiated an aura of rage that made him seem like he was a powder keg about to explode. Kai couldn't see the goblin's face, but every so often his hand would twitch in a way that made Kai think he was just barely holding off casting some dangerous magic. Silence came to the assembly hall as the lights dimmed. Only the stage remained illuminated. Phasing into view on the stage, a female elf with illustrious golden hair and a serene white robe faced the audience with a smile on her face. Kai didn't blink. She was easily the most beautiful being he had ever seen. Perfectly symmetrical and flawless in appearance, he felt himself so entranced by her beauty that he couldn't wait to hear what she wanted to say. "Welcome, new students," her gentle yet powerful voice echoed across the hall. "I welcome you to Elderwood Prime Academy. I am the Regent Director, while the Academy's Dean is out on business. You may address me as Paragon Triana." Paragon again, Kai thought. The ninth realm. I hope, at least for the students unaware, that you were able to enjoy our illusion and be surprised. Every year, as a time-honored tradition, we set up the illusion on the boundary of the Academy grounds during admissions week. Some of you were able to discern it, but most of you were left confused and mystified until crossing the boundary. It also serves as a reminder of the days of the Great War, when such illusions became a necessity not to be exterminated. During your time at our academy, we expect you to conduct yourselves as outstanding students and take the initiative to learn, grow, and become a more perfect version of yourself. The academy will not hold your hand and force you to attend classes or remain here. You have paid for the opportunities we give, and so they will be there until you choose to use them. Though not all opportunities will be readily available to you right off the bat. To access certain aspects of our academy, you must earn the right to do so. To do this will require prime points. Prime points? Kai thought. What are those? Prime points are a currency used at the academy as a way of encouraging your growth and rewarding students who advance, while at the same time giving equal opportunity to those who come from different backgrounds and do not have the backings of houses or kingdoms, rich and old. Audible groans reverberated throughout the audience. Ignoring the groans, she continued. Prime points can be used to buy materials, arms, and armor. issue quests, request guidance, and many other opportunities that the Academy provides. As for Prime Points, at the beginning of each month, an individual will receive Prime Points dependent on their current rank bracket inside their Academy class year. Our staff has assigned a rank to each new student based on your realm and level upon entering the Academy. Beginning on the first official day, which is the day after tomorrow, Prime Points will enter each of your accounts and will be available to be spent on whatever you desire. Please remember, the higher your rank, the more Prime Points you will have available to spend. Okay. But how do we rank up then? Kai asked himself. You must be asking yourselves, how do you rank up and earn more points? Paragon Triana's smile widened as if knowing every student was eager to hear the answer. The Academy holds monthly tournaments where your rank can be adjusted afterward based on how well you perform. It is also encouraged that students hold private battles with each other, where you can bet whatever you want, whether it be rank, Prime Points, or something different. Only the strongest will sit at the top, while everyone else struggles to hold their place. Another method of earning points is completing quests issued from the quest hall. There are other ways of earning points that you will learn in the coming days. We again encourage students to seek out knowledge for themselves. The room remained silent, soaking in everything Paragon Triana said. For those who have transferred in, I am sorry to say you will be placed at the end of your class rankings in accordance with your realm and level with other transfer students of the same class. As for sponsored students, they will have 500 Prime Points allocated regardless of their ranking to start with. Kai hummed. 500 points. No idea if that is a lot or little. I'll have to find out more information. Now onto a less interesting topic, but no less important. The rules. Paragon Triana's voice remained the same tone as before, but an emotion of expectation washed over him. The rules are simple. They are what we call common sense rules. This should go without saying, but every year there are a few. No murder, killing, stealing, threatening, forcing yourself on others, destruction of property, entering areas where you are not allowed, and no magic unless in a designated area or in self-defense. There are others, but I will not drone on about them. Feel free to read up on the rules in your own time. Just know that breaking the rules will result in punishments determined by the Enforcement Division. Paragon Triana clapped once, and the feeling and compulsion of having to listen vanished as the lights turned on. Still, the room remained silent and still. With a melancholy smile, Paragon Triana spoke. Life is not created equal. If it was, there would be little need for this academy. There would be no wars, no violence, no hate. Regardless, you will conduct yourselves with civility and respect others, as is your duty as a citizen of the myriad of worlds. You are all students of Elderwood Prime Academy, and despite being in competition with each other, in the end, we all must stand united against the coming darkness. Chapter 63. The Plates. With the orientation over, Kai was at a loss for what to do next. The largest problem he determined was a lack of information. Frankly, he was behind the game. All of his fellow classmates would know their way around the gigantic academy and be familiar with, or at the very least aware of each other by this point. His only connection inside the academy was his sponsor, Paragon Niles, who still remained a mystery to him. He also lacked the details regarding his sponsorship. Initially, he thought being sponsored would mean having the sponsor pay for his attendance in the academy. A simple prospect. But it appeared there was a difference between sponsored and normal students if he was to judge from his 500 gifted Prime Points. He would have to investigate and clarify the answer. Bringing out the packet he was given earlier, he quickly determined that nearly all of his classes and housing unit were located in Tower Epsilon, except for his practical weapons and magic training, which was located on the third plate at Training Field 1 and Training Field 2, respectively. If Tower Epsilon is intended for second-year students and classes, then that should mean the other towers are also aimed at their respective grades as well. Then the fourth tower must either be for a facility employed by the academy or a shared building between the three classes of students. At least that was what he thought, though that reasoning didn't provide an explanation for the purpose of the 12 open floors between the towers. Even if the plate did have training fields, that wouldn't account for its entire size. After all, he had seen many buildings on some of the plates on his way in, and each plate by itself was large enough to host a small city. Letting out a small sigh, he made the packet vanish with a thought back into his ring. The last of his instructions from his father had been to follow the path, which now truly left him to decide his next step on his own. Had he asked for more information, he was sure his father would have helped, but he understood his father's personality. The man had likely wanted Kai to be self-sufficient as a way of growing, which was fine. The opportunity had been provided. Now it was his turn to take advantage of it. The assembly hall was nearly empty. Most of the students had retreated into the lobby, however, few remained still chatting amongst each other. A sense of loneliness came over him. He knew he wasn't the most sociable person, but he missed that companionship and camaraderie he had at the Ashbourne Academy with Nicholas and Andre. Exiting the hall, he decided he would walk around and explore the place. Seeing the vastness of the lobby once again, he instantly wished for a map. The academy itself was many times larger than the capital of the Ashbourne Kingdom, and it had taken nearly the full year until he felt comfortable traversing the city without getting lost. Without an orientation point, his sense of direction could sometimes be found lacking. That was an unfortunate obstacle that stayed with him from his first life to the second. "Need a bathroom break before we go exploring," he sent to Asteria, who had taken up her mother's mantle as a living scarf around his neck. Her tail playfully slapped him in the face, causing him to chuckle. "I guess that's a no." As it turns out, a map wasn't needed. There were plenty of placards and signs, along with a simplistic architectural design that even he couldn't get lost in. Large, wide ramps separated each floor of Tower Epsilon, next to which was an empty large shaft, purposed for beings capable of flight if he was to judge by the dozen beings soaring past as he climbed the ramp. Twice he thought he was going to get trampled from behind as a few beings rushed up the ramp, but at the last second they would dodge and rush past, leaving nothing but a breeze in their wake. Other students walking on the ramp appeared unfazed by the rushing students. Between each of the first 3 plates were 12 floors, with a total of 12 plates, which made for at least 144 floors. There could have been more or less, but he didn't travel higher than the 3rd plate since none of his classes would be beyond at the current time. There was plenty of time to venture higher and explore at a later date. Not wanting to make a scene and stand out by showing up late to his classes, he took the time to find each one. Despite classes not starting until the day after tomorrow, the hallways were still filled with others. As he traveled through the stark stone hallways, he received some odd looks from other students. Either because he was a new face or because Asteria was hanging around his neck, was an unusual sight. He wondered what others thought of him as they identified him. They would most likely think he wasn't too impressive. He had identified most of the students he came across in Tower Epsilon, only to discover that he was on the lower range of realm and levels. Most students tended to be in the upper levels of the forging realm, with 2 he spotted already in the adept realm. For all he knew, those 2 students in the adept realm could have had their magic for close to 5 years by now, which would have barely qualified them to enter the academy for being too old. Or they could have had their magic only a year or 2 like him, which would make their growth impressively terrifying. It had taken him 5 years to advance to the adept realm during his first life. He spotted a few individuals that showed up as question marks when he identified them, leading him to believe they were instructors or teachers. The problem was, they looked no different than the students. Some of them possessed very youthful faces. Naturally, he had already known that the youthfulness of one's being did not equate to age. Youth was one of the perks granted to those who ascended through the realms of magic. Just by being in the forging realm, Kai would live to 100 years and look young for nearly half of that. He imagined there could be a lot of confusion when trying to romantically meet others, only to find the youthful and beautiful woman they had been pursuing was in fact a 1,000-year-old granny. I suppose such a thing might be natural in the myriad of worlds. Still, the thought made him shudder a little. Cultural difference, he reminded himself with a shake of his head. After finding all his class locations inside Tower Epsilon, he found himself at the entrance to the 3rd plate. Exiting the tower, he walked onto a giant metal walkway that bordered the perimeter of the plate and led from one tower to the next. With no walls and only a railing, there was nothing to block his vision to the outside. Below, he saw the very same bridge that he had traveled on. It stretched on for miles until it stopped where the massive exterior walls to the Academy's ground laid their claim and protection. There was no old and quaint village like the illusions had led him to believe. From his vantage point, hundreds of meters above, he had a better view of the desert and forest than when he had been on the bridge. The desert was devoid of life, only filled with sand as nothing moved. On the opposite side of the bridge, he could have sworn there had been movement below, but when he saw nothing else, he figured it could have been tree branches and leaves shifting in the wind. He didn't leave the walkway and traveled down onto the third plate. The entire plate was filled with barren fields of grass and dirt. Medium-sized walls separated each field but allowed the spectators to view from above. The closest field to his position had wooden sign labeling it as Training Field 1. This place is a wonder, he mused. 100 meters above, the next plate stretched across, giving ground to the fourth plate. Across the entirety of the third plate, for the length of a city, there wasn't a single support column bracing the plate above. Somehow, despite all the obvious weight, the plate didn't give way and collapse. He knew that none of the other plates had support columns either, as seen from the bridge. Their only support was the 4 towers located to which each plate connected. After a while of staring down at the students crossing the bridge below, he turned to the small fox by his side. "What do you want to do now?" "Sleep?" Her mouth stretched into a wide, toothy yawn. The sky had already turned to dusk while they were inside exploring Tower Epsilon, and now the last of the sky's light was vanishing. The day had been long and filled with one adventure after another. He thought he would have been abuzz with energy and excitement due to the freshness and novelty of his situation, but he let out a yawn he had been suppressing. Returning to Tower Epsilon, the two found themselves in a dormitory area, somewhere between the first and second plates. Placing his hand against the door of his assigned housing unit, an audible click resounded. Pushing the door open, he walked inside. The room was already furnished with a large bed, dresser, desk, and chair, all made from dark red wood. The only thing he found wanting was a lack of a window. Light was given by a few sources of mana light connected to a small plate next to the door that would allow him to control its output. And the room was large enough to where he could swing his weapons around without fear of hitting anything. He found himself enjoying the simplicity of it. At the end of the day, all he needed was a safe place to sleep. Everything else was a bonus. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he thought back to the day and became frustrated with himself. He wrung his hands together tightly. Taking the time to walk around and locate all his classes had been proactive, but at the same time, he hadn't talked to anyone. He was reserved by nature and wasn't one to proactively seek out others, but he knew he had screwed up. There was nothing to lose by introducing himself and asking some questions. He recognized that the stress he felt came from his lack of information. This wasn't like the Ashbourne Academy, where he had an idea of what to expect. Everything here on Titan Prime was new to him and inhuman. It wasn't overly different from what he could tell, just different enough to put him on edge until he became used to it. One step at a time, he whispered to himself. His eyes focused on Asteria, who was taking the time to sniff the furniture. The sight was amusing and released some of his tension. "Okay, let's get to sleep. Tomorrow we have a big day." Chapter 64. Lunch and Battle. Kai awoke to find himself not breathing. Resting on his face, Asteria slept soundly. Raising his hand to his face, he pushed the suffocating fox off. She slid off his face and down onto the bed, where she continued her even breathing as if being pushed didn't even register. Asteria had been by the foot of the bed when they had gone to sleep, but sometime during the night, she made her way up and onto his face. Still coming to terms with his new room and situation, he twisted his head to the side and stared at the device on his dresser. The device was able to tell time, and judging by half the bars being filled in, it was already midday. He shot up. Midday? Shit. Guess we were more tired than I thought. With a short stretch, he hopped out of bed. Out to the world, Asteria remained soundly asleep. Placing a palm against her side, he shook her. Nothing. There wasn't even a hitch in her breathing. "Asteria, wake up." He waited, but she remained in blissful and oblivious sleep. "Fine, I'll go get some food and leave you here." You snooze, you. A crimson eye opened and instantly met his own. Lose. As if to reiterate the missing of breakfast, a low rumble echoed across the room. Asteria at least had the shame to avert her eyes. Letting out a helpless smile, Kai said, "Let's go get some food." The two worked their way down to a cafeteria they had spotted the night before. The cafeteria itself was reminiscent of his previous academies. Food was piled into large pans with a line of beings waiting to get some. That was where the similarities ended. The cafeteria had a separate ramp similar to the main towers, which led to multiple floors above where more tables and food were available. Comparable to the assembly hall, some tables were occupied by only one race, while others were mixed. The same goblin from yesterday's orientation sat alone at one of the tables. Truthfully, he didn't look all too different from the other goblins he had seen so far, but the bloodthirsty aura he radiated was a sure sign that it was the same one from the day before. The aura decreed he wanted to be left alone. If his aura didn't get the point across, then his manners certainly would, as he shoveled food from his plate into his mouth using his hand. Kai felt his stomach revolt when food dropped off the goblin's hand and onto the table, only for him to swipe it off the table and shovel it into his mouth. He wasn't the only one, because the goblin glared at a few others that had the nerve to make a horrified face at the goblin's lack of manners. Getting in line, Kai grabbed 2 plates. After spending a year with Akane, he had long learned his lesson about only getting 1 plate of food. With 2 plates of food, he had a few minutes of peace to eat before Akane finished her own and moved on to his. Normally, he would end up getting a minimum of 5 full plates of food for Akane. He wouldn't take any chances with Asteria being the daughter of the gluttonous demigod fox. Even with her body the size it was, he knew it did not equate to the size of the void in their stomachs. Food in hand, he moved with purpose. Asteria's whimpering was growing louder by the minute. He stopped short of the tables. His vow to make new friends and gather information echoed in his mind, but now that he was here in the moment, he found himself at a loss of whom to sit with. There were so many options scattered about, not counting the ones on the floors above. He could play it safe and sit with other humans. A group of such was seated to his left with 2 open spots of 6. His eyes met a young man with a familiar face and black hair from that same table. He glanced at his friends and said something soft enough that Kai couldn't hear. A moment later, they all turned their heads to check him out. "I guess I stand out with a fox around my shoulders." Either that, or he had been ousted as a transfer student already for being an unfamiliar face. Kai's eyes shifted to the next table. It was comprised of a mix of races with only 1 open seat available. They were laughing happily, unaware of Kai's inner plight. Their levels were scattered but were much closer than his own than the group of humans next to them. He quickly looked at other tables and considered his options. A few more seconds dragged on, making him feel like he had already been standing there long enough to uncomfortably draw attention. Why does this have to be so difficult? Fuck it. He silently walked up to the table of mixed races. Immediately all conversation halted, their eyes on him as he stood off to the side. "Hello," Kai said with a faint smile, though it probably could have been described closer to a grimace. His body felt tense. Even with 2 lives, meeting new people never became easier. None of them spoke up at first. After an uncomfortable few seconds of silence, a lithe imp with dark red skin spoke up. "How can we help you?" "Stranger?" Its voice was unusually gruff for a creature its size. "I was wondering if I could join your group for lunch." He kept his voice even, not giving away his nerves. "I'm a new student," he added. A look of amusement passed between the group. Anyone with sense would know that. Haven't seen a human with a fox all last year. His stubby red finger tapped the table. "Look, human, I can appreciate the courage it took to come and introduce yourself, but we aren't interested. We are already a set group. Find yourself another table." The imp's tone was friendly, but his denial was blunt. Kai could only lamely nod. The table filled with humans started snickering and slapping the table, finding his plight hilarious. Turning his back, Kai felt his face heat up slightly. Without thinking, he found himself sitting down at the nearly empty table of the seething goblin. By the time he realized his mistake, it was too late. He was already sitting. The goblin looked stunned, with his mouth held open in shock and confusion. His hand hovered in mid-air while filled with food. "Sorry," Kai muttered, making quick eye contact with the large, silver-eyed goblin before pushing his utensil into the food. He apologized despite not really doing anything wrong. He had hoped the simmering goblin would ignore him. The last thing he wanted was to stand out on his first day, like during his first year again. And it was already too late to move, as Asteria had already begun devouring her food. The goblin blinked slowly and grunted. Surprisingly, he returned to his food without a fuss. His aura still exuded "don't come near me" vibes, but it wasn't overwhelming to the point of being uncomfortable. A few minutes of silent eating were broken when the goblin spoke up. "Why?" His voice was unusually soft for the rage he leaked. Kai took a napkin from the middle of the table and patted his mouth. "Why what? Why did I sit at your table?" The goblin nodded while taking a napkin and wiping his eating hand. Kai remained silent for a minute. Taking the cue from his distraction, Asteria tried to claim the rest of his food after already having eaten her own, only to be rebuffed by Kai's hand anticipating this action. "I don't know. I simply did," he replied to the goblin. The goblin gave him a look of consideration and then snorted and stood up and left. "Great going, Kai," he muttered to himself sarcastically. He ran his blocking hand through his hair. No longer thwarted, Asteria dashed over to his plate and began devouring the remaining contents. "Everyone!" a voice shouted from the cafeteria entrance. "Air challenged Zale." A great wave of commotion happened across the cafeteria at once. Many of the students stood up and began rushing out of the cafeteria at once, leaving their food half-eaten or barely eaten on the tables. Very curious Kai following suit. He grabbed Asteria, whose face was still attached to his plate. She let out a high-pitched whine as he ran after the other students up the ramp. "My food," she wailed. "You ate more than 3 people's worth." "I'm still growing. I was promised lots of food," she cried. "I'm going to tell Mom." Ignoring the threat, he felt his Lightfoot ability at work as his speed increased as he ran up the ramp. He nimbly dodged past one of the beings in the back of the group. A minute later, he entered the 4th plate and followed the others to a large building without any windows. More and more students had joined in, making for a massive group of running students all heading in the same direction. As he reached the top of the stairwell, Kai was surprised to find it was a miniature version of the Colosseum he had fought in a few days prior on Eris, with some differences. Unlike the one on Eris, this Colosseum was completely closed overhead. It had raised seating that was already filled with 1,000 others and still growing. In the pit below, 2 young students stood across from one another on a smaller raised platform, no longer than 50 meters across each way. An older woman with the Academy's emblem on her armor stood between them. 5 minutes later, the crowd had increased to a few thousand, though the number of students showing up had slowed significantly. "Today I will arbitrate the battle between the challenger Air and the challenged Zale." The adjudicator between the 2 students began, nodding first to his left, where a female high elf covered in bronze armor kneeled and prayed with one hand out, flat on the ground. In her other hand was a scimitar of ethereal quality that lay flat against the front of her helmet. On the adjudicator's right was an imp no bigger than the average gnome. He wore a simple robe that appeared a size too large for him, as it covered his feet entirely with plenty of fabric to spare. The imp's face was completely composed and void of emotions. His beady black eyes were intensely focused on his opponent and nothing else. High Elf, Forging level 96. Imp, Forging level 100. The adjudicator in the middle of the arena raised a hand and silence followed. Should the challenger Ari win, she will be granted Zale's ranking on the leaderboards, which at the current time is rank 3. And should the challenged Zale win, he will receive 1,382 prime points from the challenger as put forth as the stake for the bet. Standard battle rules apply. You may begin. With that said, the adjudicator vanished from the arena. Familiar blue mist burst out of the elf, spreading across the small arena until nothing except the mist could be seen. Both fighters had vanished from his sight. It appeared denser than the mist in the illusionary misty region, as it was more concentrated. Kai had hoped to see what he might have fought, like had he chosen mist magic and not gravity during his magic selection, But with the mists blocking the view of the fight, he found himself disappointed. Not by the lack of vision, but by the fact that the elf had to resort to tricks against her opponent. A dwarf that had been standing at the railing before them sighed and sat down between Kai and a lion beastkin with an impressive man in the next seat over. "You think air could ever win a fight without covering the field in that?" An orange glow from within the mists shot across the field of battle, stopping the speaker cold. Confounding mists of hers, the dwarf asked. "No chance. Her skill set is all about deception and obscuration," his beastkin friend said. His eyes shifted as if watching something in the mists that Kai could not see. "I know." The dwarf let out another sigh. He wasn't even bothering looking down into the mist-filled arena anymore, instead tinkering with a cube in his hands made of green metallic material. "Who do you think is going to win?" Kai asked, injecting himself into the conversation. Without a pause, the dwarf answered, "Zale, no question." "I'm not so sure. Air left for 3 weeks and only just returned this morning. She must be confident to challenge Zale again." The beastkin growled lightly. His eyes never left the mists. "She was rank 16 when she left. Now she is 28. She should have challenged someone closer to her original rank when she got back. Skipping ahead to the undisputed third-ranked individual is plain stupidity." The dwarf picked at something in his teeth. "Still, you really have to admire her. She has more grit than most dwarves facing their first symbol of magic. Those were the days. I don't think I was sober for an entire month." Plumes of orange and yellow flames soared out of the mists and crashed into an invisible barrier covering the arena, stopping them completely. There was now a constant hue of orange inside the mists, turning the once blue mists orange-tinged. Down the line of seats, they could hear other spectators making bets. An idea came to Kai. "I'd wager 1 prime point that air will defeat Zale." "Ah, but I'm currently out of points until tomorrow." Kai thought to see if they would accept the wager if it meant gathering more information. "Ha! How did you manage to spend all yours?" The dwarf laughed heartily. Kai shook his head. "I didn't. I only transferred in yesterday." "A transfer student," the beastkin hummed, but it came out more like a purr. "Okay, I'll take your bet. My name is Thrain of the Clan Granite, and that is Gladriel," the dwarf introduced. He put down his trinket and looked at Kai for the first time since the conversation began. For such a fresh-faced dwarf, his rust-colored beard was already down to his waist. "Kai Kineris," he stuck his hand out. The dwarf looked at the appendage puzzled. "It's a handshake, a sign of agreement to the terms set forth," Kai explained. "I know what a handshake is, Bunderhead. You think I live under a rock or something?" He crossed his arms with a frown. "I guess you haven't read the packet yet." "No," Kai admitted. "I spent the day exploring after orientation yesterday." At this point, Kai had stopped paying attention to the fight below. Not that was anything to see. "It's all in the packet, but simply either today or tomorrow, a point bracelet will be delivered to your housing unit. It is comprised of innovative enchantments that are keyed to your aura signature that works with will and intent to record, add, or subject prime points during the course of your stay in the Prime Academy." "That sounds fictional," Kai said skeptically. "I know, right?" Thrain slapped his knee. "None that I know of have been able to reverse engineer the enchantments. In any case, the bracelet works in such a way that you can personally transfer points to another's if you were to make a bet and lose or buy something. We can transfer the 1 prime point next time we meet." "And what happens if one simply doesn't?" Kai asked. The system of transferring points seemed based on an honorary system of trust, hoping that one would uphold their word. Thrain let out an evil chuckle. "Well, that's where the enforcement division comes into play. Take my word, never. Never get on their bad side." A feminine yell called out from inside the mists. With new points being granted tomorrow, Air must really want the points granted from the 3rd rank. Before she left, she would receive the same number of prime points as a person in rank 99. It's the bracket comprised of ranks 100 to 11. Only by entering the top 10 would her points increase significantly. Even more so if she can defeat Zale and take his 3rd rank. She'd likely earn more prime points in 2 months as the 3rd rank than she would in 6 months as rank 16. The risk is justified to challenge Zale. Still, she could have worked her way up slower, even if it meant waiting 1 month. Kai suppressed a smile. Intentional or not, the dwarf Thrain had proved to be a treasure trove of knowledge so far. What he found most interesting was the strongest second-year students were already at the boundary of the third realm. On his lap, Asteria had fallen asleep, likely digesting the food in her non-bloated stomach. She cutely curled her front legs around her face as if to block the light and noise. More and more flames streamed from the mist's boundary. The battle had picked up in intensity. "It seems our new friend won the bet," Gladriel calmly said. 10 seconds later, both flames and mist vanished, signaling the end of the fight. On the field of battle, the elf hunched over, hands on knees, breathing deeply, but still standing, while the imp lay bloody and unconscious on the floor. "By the Holy Nine, she did it," laughed Thrain.